There is something beneath the Pacific Ocean that screamed for 15 seconds and then went silent. It happened on the 5th of March, 1999. A network of underwater listening devices, originally built to track enemy submarines during the Cold War, picked up an audio signal so loud, so strange, and so impossible to explain that the scientists who first heard it simply stared at their screens. They played it back. They played it again. They ran it through every filter, every classification algorithm, every known acoustic signature in the database. Nothing matched. Not a whale. Not an earthquake. Not a volcanic eruption. Not a submarine. Not an iceberg calving. Not the groaning of tectonic plates shifting along the ocean floor. The sound had characteristics that did not fit any recognized source, natural or artificial, and it came from a part of the ocean so remote, so crushingly deep, that no human being has ever visited the exact coordinates where it was recorded. They called it Julia. The name sounds almost gentle, almost human. It was assigned by researchers at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, the same agency that monitors hurricanes and maps the seafloor. They gave it that name because the sound, when compressed and sped up for human ears, carried an eerie, wavering quality that reminded someone in the lab of a voice. Not words, not language, but something that hovered at the edge of vocal. Something that sounded, even to trained acousticians, as though it were alive. The Julius sound was recorded by autonomous hydrophones, underwater microphones positioned thousands of miles apart across the equatorial Pacific. These instruments sit at depths of roughly 1,000 meters, suspended in a layer of the ocean called the SOFAR channel, a zone where temperature, pressure, and salinity combine to create a natural acoustic waveguide that allows sound to travel extraordinary distances with minimal loss. A single loud event occurring anywhere in the Pacific Basin can, under the right conditions, be detected by hydrophones on the opposite side of the ocean. The Julia sound was detected on multiple sensors simultaneously, which means it was powerful. It means the source was radiating energy across a vast area, and it means that whatever produced that sound did so with a force that most known phenomena simply cannot generate in that particular acoustic signature. Since 1999, the Julia sound has not been conclusively explained. NOAA's official position is cautious, suggesting it may be related to a large iceberg running aground somewhere between Antarctica and the equatorial Pacific. This is a plausible hypothesis. It is not, however, a confirmed explanation. The signal's spectral properties, its duration, and its apparent source location have all been subjects of quiet debate among ocean acoustics researchers for more than 2 decades. Some accept the iceberg hypothesis. Others point out that the signal does not perfectly match the acoustic fingerprint of any recorded iceberg event. And a smaller number ask a question that is harder to answer. If we have mapped less than 5% of the deep ocean floor, how confident can we be that we have catalogued every possible source of sound beneath the waves? That question sits at the heart of everything that follows. By the end of tonight, you're going to understand why the Julia sound matters, not just as an acoustic curiosity, but as a symbol of something far larger. It is a reminder that the ocean, the single largest habitat on our planet, the body of water that covers more than 70% of the Earth's surface and contains more than 97% of all the water that exists, remains almost entirely unknown. Not partially unknown, not mostly explored with a few gaps, almost entirely unknown. The deep ocean, defined as everything below 1,000 meters, is less mapped, less studied, and less visited than the surface of the moon. There are trenches 7 miles deep where no human eye has ever looked. There are plains the size of continents that have never been touched by light. There are sounds that echo through this darkness, recorded by our instruments but understood by no one. The Julia sound is one of those recordings, but it is not alone. It belongs to a family of unexplained ocean noises that emerged from the deep Pacific during the 1990s and early 2000s, each one stranger than the last, each one captured by the same hydrophone arrays, and each one lacking a definitive explanation. Together, they form an acoustic portrait of a world we cannot see, a world that speaks in frequencies and pressures and durations that our instruments can detect, but our knowledge cannot decode. They tell us, in the language of sound waves traveling through cold, black water, that the ocean is doing things we have not accounted for, that forces are at work beneath the surface that we have not named. And that, perhaps, is the most unsettling part. Not that the ocean made a sound we cannot explain, but that it has been making sounds all along for all of history, and we have only just now developed the technology to hear them. What else is happening down there right now, in the eternal darkness, that we have no instruments to detect? Before we get started, if you find these mysteries as fascinating as we do, take a second to like the video or subscribe. It is a simple action, but it helps this channel reach more curious minds like yours. Tonight, we are going to descend into the deep ocean. We are going to trace the history of how humans learned to listen to the sounds beneath the waves. We are going to examine the Julia sound in detail, alongside the other unexplained recordings that Noah has captured. We are going to confront what it means that our planet produces noises we cannot identify, from places we cannot reach, through mechanisms we do not understand. And we are going to sit with the weight of a truth that most people never consider, that the majority of Earth is not above us, not around us, but below us, sunk in darkness and pressure, generating a symphony that no human was ever meant to hear. Now, let us begin. To understand the Julia sound, to truly grasp why it unsettled the scientists who first analyzed it and why it continues to provoke quiet unease among ocean acousticians, we first need to understand the environment from which it emerged. We need to talk about the ocean. Not the ocean as it appears from a beach, sparkling and inviting, blue, green and warm. Not the ocean as it looks in photographs taken from satellites, a flat expanse of colour draped across a globe. We need to talk about the ocean as it actually is. A three-dimensional world of crushing pressure, absolute darkness, and biological strangeness so extreme that it challenges every assumption we hold about what life can be and where it can exist. The ocean covers approximately 361 million square kilometers of the Earth's surface. That number, written out, is staggering in its scope, but it becomes more meaningful when placed alongside a comparison. The total land area of Earth, every continent, every island, every exposed rock, amounts to roughly 149 million square kilometers. The ocean is more than twice the size of all land combined. If you were to take the entire landmass of the planet and fold it into the ocean basins, there would still be water left over, spreading across the surface with no land to interrupt it. But the surface area is only part of the story. The ocean is not a shallow film of water spread across the planet. It has depth, tremendous depth, and that depth is where the true scale becomes difficult to comprehend. The average depth of the world's oceans is approximately 3,700 meters. That is roughly 2.3 miles. At this average depth, sunlight has long since vanished. The pressure is approximately 370 times greater than atmospheric pressure at sea level. A human body, unprotected, would be crushed in seconds. Every square centimeter of surface at that depth bears the weight of roughly 370 kilograms pressing down upon it. Imagine stacking nearly 400 small cars on top of a single dinner plate. That is the kind of force the deep ocean exerts, not as an occasional event, but as a permanent, unchanging condition, every second of every day, across every centimeter of the deep sea floor. And that is the average. The ocean goes much deeper. The deepest point on Earth is the Challenger Deep, located in the Mariana Trench in the western Pacific Ocean. Its depth has been measured at approximately 10,920 meters, or roughly 35,814 feet. That is nearly 11 kilometers straight down. To put this in a scaled comparison that reveals the true imbalance between the ocean and the land, consider Mount Everest. The summit of Mount Everest, the highest point on the planet's surface, stands at 8,848 meters above sea level. If Mount Everest were placed at the bottom of the Challenger Deep, its peak would still be submerged beneath more than 2,000 meters of water. The tallest mountain on Earth would vanish beneath the ocean with more than a mile of water to spare above its summit. Here is a second comparison. The cruising altitude of a commercial aeroplane is approximately 10,000 to 12,000 meters. The Challenger Deep is as far below the ocean surface as a passenger jet flies above the land. If you were to sit in a window seat at cruising altitude, look down at the ground below, and then rotate that distance downward beneath the waves, you would have the depth of the Mariana Trench. Every meter of that vertical distance is filled with water, and every meter adds pressure. And here is a third. The pressure at the bottom of the Challenger Deep exceeds 1,100 times atmospheric pressure at sea level. That is approximately 8 tons of force per square inch. If you were to place a standard steel beam at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the water pressure would compress it. Not slowly, not over time, but immediately and permanently. The deep ocean does not negotiate with the materials we send into it. It simply crushes them. Now consider light. At the surface of the ocean, sunlight penetrates the water and creates what marine scientists call the epipelagic zone, the sunlit layer. This zone extends from the surface down to approximately 200 meters. Within this narrow band, photosynthesis occurs, phytoplankton bloom, and the vast majority of marine life that humans are familiar with, fish, dolphins, sea turtles, coral reefs, carries on its daily existence. 200 meters. Out of an average depth of 3,700 meters, the sunlit zone represents barely 5% of the ocean's vertical extent. The layer where life is warm and visible is a thin skin floating on top of a vast, cold, lightless body. Below the epipelagic zone lies the mesopelagic zone, sometimes called the twilight zone. This extends from 200 meters down to roughly 1,000 meters. Here, sunlight fades to a faint bluish glow, then dims further, and then ceases entirely. The creatures that inhabit this zone have evolved extraordinary adaptations to survive in near-total darkness. Many produce their own light through bioluminescence, generating cold chemical reactions within their bodies to create flashes, glows, and pulses in the perpetual dusk. The mesopelagic zone is home to vast populations of lanternfish, bristlemouth fish, hatchetfish, and other organisms that form the largest animal migration on Earth each night, rising toward the surface to feed under cover of darkness, and then sinking back into the twilight before dawn. This daily vertical migration involves billions upon billions of individual organisms, and it moves more biomass than any other migration event on the planet. Yet most people have never heard of it. Below 1,000 meters, we enter the bathypelagic zone, the midnight zone. Here there is no light at all, none. Not a photon of sunlight reaches this depth. The only illumination comes from the living things themselves, brief flickers of bioluminescence in an otherwise absolute blackness. The temperature hovers between 1 and 4 degrees Celsius, barely above freezing, and it remains at this temperature regardless of what is happening at the surface. A tropical storm could be raging above, the sun could be blazing at noon. At 1,000 meters below, nothing changes. The darkness is total, the cold is constant, the pressure is immense. And the silence, the acoustic silence as perceived by human ears, is not silence at all. It is filled with sound. Low-frequency rumbles from distant earthquakes, the mournful calls of deep-diving whales, the cracking and grinding of ice shelves thousands of kilometers away. The ocean's midnight zone is a concert hall of infrasound, and the instruments needed to hear it were classified military secrets for the better part of half a century. The bathypelagic zone extends down to approximately 4,000 meters. Below it lies the abyssopelagic zone, the abyssal zone, stretching from 4,000 to 6,000 meters. The word abyss comes from the Greek abyssos, meaning bottomless. The ancient Greeks believed that certain parts of the ocean had no floor, that the water simply descended forever into a void without end. They were wrong about the absence of a bottom, but their sense of scale was not entirely misplaced. The abyssal plains are among the flattest, most featureless landscapes on Earth. Vast expanses of sediment-covered rock stretching for thousands of kilometers in every direction, interrupted only by the occasional seamount, ridge, or hydrothermal vent. These plains are covered in a fine layer of organic material called marine snow, a slow, continuous rain of dead organisms drifting down from the sunlit waters. Marine snow is the primary food source for many abyssal creatures, and it arrives with geological patience, settling millimeter by millimeter over centuries and millennia building layers of sediment that record the ocean's history in chemical and biological traces. Below 6,000 meters lies the Hadal-Pelagic Zone, the Hadal Zone, named after Hades, the Greek god of the underworld. This is the realm of the ocean trenches, the deepest scars on the planet's surface, carved by the collision and subduction of tectonic plates. Fewer human beings have visited the Hadal Zone than have walked on the Moon. As of the early 21st century, the total number of people who have reached the bottom of the Challenger Deep can be counted on one hand. The pressures here exceed 1,000 times atmospheric pressure. The temperature approaches 0 degrees Celsius. The darkness is not merely the absence of light, but the permanent structural impossibility of light ever reaching this place through natural means. And yet, life exists here. Amphipods, tiny crustaceans no larger than a human thumb, have been found thriving in the deepest trenches. Xenophyophores, giant single-celled organisms that can grow to the size of a human fist, carpet the trench floors. Sea cucumbers crawl slowly across the sediment at 10,000 meters. Microbial communities flourish in conditions that, on the surface, would be considered completely sterilizing. The Hadal Zone is not dead. It is alive, populated by organisms that have found ways to exist under pressures that would destroy any surface creature in moments. The existence of life at these depths is not merely surprising. It is a fundamental challenge to our understanding of the limits of biology. For decades, scientists assumed that life required certain baseline conditions: warmth, light, moderate pressure, access to oxygen and organic nutrients drifting down from a photosynthetic surface. The deep ocean violates every one of these assumptions. It is cold beyond what surface organisms can tolerate. It is dark beyond what eyes can perceive. The pressure is lethal by any standard developed on land. Oxygen is scarce, and yet the deep ocean is not merely surviving. It is in many respects thriving, hosting communities of organisms that have developed entirely novel biochemistries, metabolisms, and survival strategies. This brings us to sound. Sound behaves differently in water than it does in air, and this difference is not subtle. In air, sound travels at roughly 343 meters per second. In seawater, it travels at approximately 1,500 meters per second, more than 4 times faster. Sound also travels farther in water, with significantly less energy loss, particularly in certain layers of the ocean, where temperature and pressure gradients create natural corridors for acoustic propagation. The most important of these corridors is the SOFAR channel, the sound fixing and ranging channel. The SOFAR channel exists at a depth of roughly 600 to 1,200 meters in most parts of the ocean, though this varies with latitude, temperature, and season. At this depth, the combination of decreasing temperature from above and increasing pressure from below creates a zone of minimum sound speed. Sound waves that enter this zone are continuously refracted back toward the center of the channel, bending upward when they drift too deep and downward when they drift too shallow. The result is a natural acoustic waveguide, a corridor through which sound can travel thousands of kilometers with remarkably little attenuation. A moderately loud sound generated at the right depth in the Pacific Ocean can, under favorable conditions, be detected by a hydrophone on the far side of the ocean basin. The SOFAR channel was discovered during the Second World War by Maurice Ewing and Joe Warzel at Columbia University. Its military applications were immediately recognized. If a downed pilot crashed into the ocean and detonated a small explosive charge at the right depth, the detonation sound could travel through the SOFAR channel and be detected by listening stations thousands of miles away, allowing rescue teams to triangulate the pilot's position. After the war, the United States Navy expanded this principle into a vast network of underwater listening stations called SOSUS, the Sound Surveillance System. Originally designed to track Soviet submarines during the Cold War, SOSUS consisted of large arrays of hydrophones positioned along the ocean floor at strategic locations throughout the Atlantic and Pacific. These hydrophones were connected by undersea cables to onshore processing facilities, where teams of analysts could monitor the acoustic environment of entire ocean basins in real time. SOSUS was one of the most closely guarded military secrets of its era. Its existence was classified, its capabilities were classified, the location of its hydrophone arrays was classified, and the astonishing volume of acoustic data it collected, the sounds of the deep ocean recorded continuously for decades, was accessible only to military intelligence personnel and their immediate support staff. For the entire duration of the Cold War, the deep ocean was singing, groaning, cracking, rumbling, and making sounds that no civilian scientist had ever heard. That changed in the early 1990s. With the collapse of the Soviet Union and the diminished submarine threat, portions of the SOSUS network were declassified and made available to civilian researchers. NOAA was among the first organizations to gain access. In 1991, NOAA established the Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory's Acoustic Monitoring Program, deploying its own network of autonomous hydrophones in the equatorial Pacific to supplement the declassified SOSUS data. These hydrophones were designed to record continuously, capturing every sound that passed through the SOFAR channel at their locations, and transmitting the data for analysis. When NOAA's scientists began listening to the deep ocean for the first time, they encountered a world of sound that was both familiar and profoundly strange. They heard the expected sounds: the low-frequency calls of blue whales and fin whales, the rumble of undersea earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, the cracking of ice shelves in polar regions, the hum of shipping traffic. These sounds formed a baseline, a recognizable acoustic landscape that could be catalogued and classified. But woven into this baseline were other sounds, sounds that did not match any known source, sounds that were too loud, too long, too structured, or too anomalous in their frequency characteristics to be easily categorized. Between 1991 and the early 2000s, NOAA recorded a series of such sounds, and the researchers who studied them gave each one a name: the bloop, the upsweep, the slow down, the train, the whistle, and Julia. Each of these sounds had a unique acoustic fingerprint. Each originated from a different location, occurred at a different time, and displayed different spectral characteristics. Some lasted for a few seconds, others persisted for minutes. One, the upsweep, has been detected seasonally since it was first recorded, repeating with a regularity that implies an ongoing, persistent source. Not all of these sounds remain unexplained. The bloop, initially a source of intense speculation, was later attributed by NOAA to icequakes, the cracking of large icebergs. The slowdown was similarly linked to ice-related processes. But even among the sounds that have received proposed explanations, debate persists about whether those explanations fully account for the observed data. Julia sits in this uncertain territory. It was detected once. It lasted approximately 15 seconds. It was loud enough to be recorded across multiple hydrophone stations, and it has never been repeated. The official hypothesis is ice-related activity, but the lack of a definitive match, the absence of a repeat event, and the peculiar frequency structure of the signal have kept it alive in the minds of researchers who study the deep ocean's acoustic environment. And it is this environment, this vast, dark, pressurized, barely explored world of sound that we must hold in our minds as we move forward. The Julia sound did not emerge from a laboratory. It did not emerge from a controlled environment. It emerged from a place where the pressure would crush a submarine, where the darkness has persisted since before human civilization, and where the sounds travel through channels that were secret until 3 decades ago. Whatever made the Julia sound did so in a realm that operates by rules we are still learning, in conditions we can barely simulate, at depths we can scarcely visit. And that is where the mystery truly begins. Consider what this means in practical terms. When the Julia sound was recorded in 1999, the hydrophones that captured it were part of an array that spanned roughly 3,000 nautical miles of the equatorial Pacific. Each hydrophone sat at a depth within the SOFAR channel, passively absorbing every acoustic vibration that passed through the water column at its location. These instruments do not discriminate. They do not filter for importance. They simply record continuously, capturing the entire acoustic output of the deep ocean within their range. The result is an enormous volume of data, a continuous soundtrack of the abyss that includes everything from the low moans of blue whales to the sharp cracks of distant undersea earthquakes. to the ambient hiss of rain falling on the surface, thousands of meters above. Sorting through this data is an enormous task. Analysts rely on spectrograms, visual representations that display frequency on one axis and time on the other, with the intensity of the sound represented by color or brightness. A trained analyst can look at a spectrogram and instantly recognize the signature of a known phenomenon. A blue whale call has a distinctive pattern. An earthquake rumble produces a specific spectral shape. A submarine propeller leaves a characteristic acoustic trace. These known signatures are like fingerprints, unique to their source and recognizable on sight. When an unknown sound appears on a spectrogram, it stands out precisely because it does not match any of these known fingerprints. It occupies space on the frequency-time display in a way that is unfamiliar. Its shape, its duration, its intensity, its frequency range all deviate from the expected, and when that deviation is significant enough, it gets flagged, it gets replayed, it gets analyzed, it gets a name. The naming convention for NOAA's unexplained ocean sounds is informal, almost affectionate. The bloop was named for the way it sounded when sped up. The upsweep was named for its rising frequency pattern. The slowdown was named for the way its frequency decreased over time. Julia was named because someone thought it sounded like a woman. There is something poignant in this practice, giving human names and human associations to sounds that come from a place no human can survive. It is as though, by naming the sounds, the scientists were trying to make the deep ocean a little less alien, a little more approachable, a little more like the world they understood. But the deep ocean resists domestication. It resists our categories and our comfort. It is too vast, too dark, too pressurized, and too strange to be tamed by names and spectrograms. The sounds that emerge from it are not messages meant for us. They are fragments of a vast acoustic reality that has existed for as long as the ocean has existed, a reality that encompasses tectonic shifts, biological processes, chemical reactions, and physical events that we may never fully catalogue. Consider the sheer volume of water involved. The ocean contains approximately 1.335 billion cubic kilometers of water. That is 1,335,000,000 cubic kilometers. Every single cubic meter of that water is a potential medium for sound transmission. Every undersea ridge, every abyssal plain, every trench, every volcanic seamount, every iceberg, every living organism, every pocket of gas trapped in sediment, every current, every thermal gradient, every pressure variation is a potential source of sound. The acoustic environment of the deep ocean is not simple, it is not quiet, it is overwhelmingly complex. And we are listening to it through a tiny number of hydrophones positioned in a handful of locations. Imagine trying to understand the full range of sounds produced in a city by placing 3 microphones in 3 different neighborhoods and recording for a year. You would capture some sounds clearly, you would capture other sounds as faint, distorted echoes, and there would be entire categories of sound that you would never detect at all because they occurred in parts of the city where no microphone was placed. The deep ocean is vastly larger than any city, and our hydrophone coverage is proportionally far sparser. This is the context in which the Julia sound must be understood. It is not merely a strange noise recorded in the Pacific. It is a single data point extracted from an acoustic environment of almost incomprehensible size and complexity, detected by an instrument network that covers only a fraction of the total ocean volume, and analyzed by scientists who, despite their expertise, are working with a catalogue of known sounds that is almost certainly incomplete. The history of ocean acoustics is a history of surprises. Every time we have deployed new listening technology in the ocean, we have heard things we did not expect. The first hydrophones deployed during the Second World War revealed that the ocean was far noisier than anyone had imagined. The SOSUS arrays during the Cold War revealed whale songs and earthquake patterns that transformed marine biology and geophysics. The NOAA hydrophone program in the 1990s revealed an entire category of unexplained sounds. Each advance in listening technology has expanded the known acoustic landscape of the ocean, and each expansion has revealed phenomena that were previously invisible. There is no reason to believe this process of discovery has ended. In fact, there is every reason to believe it has barely begun. The ocean is three-dimensional. Sound can travel vertically as well as horizontally. The SOFAR channel captures sounds that propagate horizontally through the deep ocean, but there are sounds that travel vertically, sounds that are generated at the surface and propagate downward, sounds that originate at the ocean floor and travel upward, sounds that bounce and refract and scatter in ways that our current instruments may not be positioned to detect. The deep ocean is also changing. Currents shift, temperatures change, ice sheets grow and shrink, volcanic activity waxes and wanes, biological populations migrate and evolve. Each of these changes alters the acoustic environment of the deep ocean in ways that may produce new sounds or modify existing ones. The Julia sound was recorded once, in 1999. If the same phenomenon that produced it were to occur again tomorrow, at a slightly different location or depth, it might be detected differently, or it might not be detected at all. This uncertainty is not a failure of science. It is the honest condition of a discipline that is attempting to study the largest, deepest, and most inaccessible environment on the planet with tools that are sophisticated but limited in their coverage. The scientists who work in ocean acoustics are acutely aware of these limitations. They know that their data represents a tiny sample of a vast reality. They know that their explanations are provisional, subject to revision as new data becomes available. And they know that the deep ocean almost certainly contains acoustic phenomena that have never been recorded and may never be explained. It is this awareness, this scientific humility in the face of overwhelming scale, that makes the Julia sound significant, not because it is necessarily exotic or inexplicable, but because it reminds us that the deep ocean is capable of producing sounds that fall outside the boundaries of our current understanding. It reminds us that our maps of the ocean floor are incomplete, our catalogues of ocean sounds are partial, and our understanding of deep ocean processes is in its earliest stages. The weight of water above the SOFAR channel, the darkness that surrounds the hydrophones, the pressure that bears down on every instrument we lower into the deep, these are not merely physical conditions. They are barriers to knowledge. They are the walls of a room that we have barely entered, and the Julia sound is one of the echoes bouncing off those walls, reaching our ears distorted by distance and refraction, carrying information that we can detect but not yet fully decode. But what scientists discovered next was worse than anyone expected. There is another dimension to the ocean's acoustic character that deserves attention, and it concerns time. Sound does not merely travel through the ocean, it persists. A loud event at one location can produce acoustic reverberations that bounce off the seafloor, the surface, and various thermal boundaries within the water column, arriving at a hydrophone not as a single event, but as a drawn-out sequence of echoes. These reverberations complicate the analysis of any recorded sound because they smear the original signal across time, blending it with its own reflections and making it more difficult to determine the true characteristics of the source. When researchers at NOAA first examined the Julia signal, they had to account for this reverberation effect. The 15-second duration of the recording does not necessarily mean the source event lasted 15 seconds. It may have been a shorter, more intense burst that was stretched and distorted by the acoustic properties of the water through which it travelled. Or it may have been a genuinely prolonged event. Without knowing the exact source location and the precise acoustic conditions along the propagation path, it is difficult to distinguish between these possibilities. This is a recurring challenge in deep ocean acoustics. The ocean is not a clean, controlled medium. It is a messy, layered, constantly shifting environment in which sound waves are bent, scattered, absorbed, and reflected by a multitude of factors. Salinity gradients bend sound. Temperature layers refract it. The seafloor absorbs some frequencies and reflects others. Biological organisms scatter acoustic energy. Currents shift the medium through which the sound is traveling, altering its path in real time. Interpreting a sound recorded in this environment requires not just knowledge of acoustics, but detailed knowledge of the ocean conditions at the time and place of the recording, conditions that, in many cases, were not measured and cannot be reconstructed. This is why certainty is rare in ocean acoustics. This is why NOAA's researchers describe their explanations as hypotheses rather than conclusions. This is why the Julia sound more than a quarter of a century after it was recorded, remains formally unresolved. The data exists. The spectrogram is clear. The recording has been preserved and studied. But the ocean through which that sound travelled, the conditions it encountered, the paths it followed, the distortions it accumulated, these are variables that cannot be fully recovered, and so the sound sits in the archive, labelled and named, catalogued but not explained, a 15-second fragment of the deep ocean's voice that speaks in a language we have not yet learned to translate. And this brings us to a point worth dwelling on. The ocean's acoustic record, the sum total of every sound we have captured from the deep ocean since the early 1990s, represents an infinitesimal fraction of the total acoustic output of the world's oceans. We have listened, with a handful of hydrophones, in a handful of locations, for a few decades. The ocean has been producing sound for as long as it has existed. The gap between what we have heard and what has actually occurred is not small. It is oceanic in itself. When we say that the Julia sound is unexplained, we are not making a dramatic claim. We are stating a statistical reality. Given the vastness of the ocean, the complexity of its acoustic environment, the limitations of our listening network, and the incompleteness of our catalogue of known sound sources, it would be astonishing if every sound we recorded could be immediately and definitively explained. The surprising thing is not that unexplained sounds exist. The surprising thing is that we expected them not to. The deep ocean does not owe us explanations. It does not arrange its physics for our convenience. It produces sounds according to the forces acting within it, forces that include tectonic activity, ice dynamics, biological processes, chemical reactions, and physical phenomena that we may not have identified yet. Our instruments capture what they can. Our analysts interpret what they know. And the gap between what the ocean produces and what we understand remains for now vast enough to hold every mystery we have yet to solve. On the 5th of March, 1999, at a time that was recorded but not publicly emphasized, the autonomous hydrophone array operated by NOAA's Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory detected an acoustic event in the equatorial Pacific Ocean. The signal appeared simultaneously on multiple hydrophones, a clear indication of significant acoustic power. When the spectrogram was generated, the analysts saw something that did not immediately match any known template. The sound rose in frequency, held for a moment, then swept downward in a pattern that was both complex and disturbingly coherent. It lasted approximately 15 seconds, and then it stopped. The signal was catalogued, as all anomalous sounds detected by the array were catalogued. It was archived, it was analysed, and it was given a name, Julia. The naming was informal, as was the practice for all of NOAA's unexplained acoustic detections. The researcher who first listened to the sped-up playback thought the sound had a vocal quality, a wavering, descending tone that, to a human ear conditioned to recognize voices, sounded eerily like a person. Not a word, not a cry, but something in between, something that hovered at the edge of organic. The name stuck. To understand why the Julia sound presented such a problem for the researchers who examined it, we need to understand what a normal, unexplained sound looks like in the context of deep ocean acoustics. Thus, when a sound is detected that does not immediately match a known source, the standard analytical procedure involves several steps. First, the spectrogram is examined for distinctive features: frequency range, duration, harmonic structure, amplitude envelope, and any patterns of repetition or modulation. Second, the signal is compared against a database of known acoustic signatures, including whale calls, earthquake and volcanic sounds, ice-related noises, and anthropogenic sources such as ship propellers and military sonar. Third, if no match is found, the signal's apparent source location is estimated using the arrival times at different hydrophones, and this location is cross-referenced with known geological and oceanographic features. In the case of the Julia sound, each of these steps produced results that were suggestive but not definitive. The spectrogram revealed a signal with a complex frequency structure. Unlike a simple tone or a broad-spectrum noise burst, the Julia signal showed a pattern that rose, peaked, and fell across a range of low frequencies. This shape is sometimes called a downsweep, when the overall trend is falling in pitch, and it bears a superficial resemblance to certain types of ice-related acoustic events. However, The exact contour of the Julia signal, the rate of its frequency change, the harmonics present in the recording, and the way the signal amplitude varied over its 15-second duration did not precisely replicate any specific ice event in the existing database. The source location estimation was also problematic. By comparing the arrival times of the signal at different hydrophones, analysts could approximate the general area from which the sound originated. The estimated location was in the eastern equatorial Pacific, a region of open ocean far from any major landmass or known ice feature. This is significant because the primary hypothesis for the Julia sound, iceberg grounding, requires the presence of a large iceberg. Icebergs in the Pacific are not common. They do exist, particularly in the southern Pacific, where ice carved from the Antarctic ice shelf can drift northward, but their occurrence in the equatorial Pacific is unusual. The proposed explanation requires that a large iceberg, carved from Antarctica, drifted far enough north to reach the equatorial region, and then ran aground on a seafloor feature, producing the Julia sound. This is not impossible. Large Antarctic icebergs have been tracked drifting significant distances northward, and the equatorial Pacific does contain underwater ridges, seamounts, and other bathymetric features upon which an iceberg could theoretically ground. But the chain of events required is specific, and the absence of satellite or visual confirmation of a large iceberg at the estimated source location at the time of the recording introduces uncertainty. But here is the problem. The Julia sound is not the only unexplained acoustic event recorded by NOAA's hydrophone arrays. It is one of at least 6 major unidentified sounds detected between the early 1990s and the mid-2000s. Each of these sounds has its own characteristics, its own estimated source location, and its own set of proposed explanations. Taken individually, each sound can be addressed with a specific hypothesis, usually involving ice dynamics, volcanic activity, or some combination of the two. Taken collectively, however, they paint a picture of an acoustic environment that is producing a wider range of unexplained sounds than our current models predict. The bloop, detected in 1997, 2 years before Julia, was for a time the most famous of these sounds. It was an ultra-low frequency sound of tremendous power, detected on multiple sensors across the Pacific. Its spectrogram showed a rapid frequency rise over about 1 minute. The bloop was eventually attributed by NOAA to an icequake, the fracturing of a large ice mass, likely in the Antarctic region. This attribution is widely accepted, though it was not made until years after the initial detection, and some researchers have noted that the acoustic profile of the bloop does not perfectly match all known icequake recordings. The upsweep is another case entirely. First detected in 1991, the upsweep consists of a narrow band sound that rises in frequency over several seconds, repeating at regular intervals. Unlike the bloop or Julia, the upsweep has been detected repeatedly, with a seasonal pattern that peaks in spring and autumn. Its estimated source location is in the South Pacific, near known volcanic and seismically active regions. The leading hypothesis is that it is produced by volcanic activity, possibly lava interacting with seawater, but the exact mechanism has not been identified, and the regularity of the signal, its persistence over decades, and its precise frequency characteristics remain subjects of ongoing research. The slowdown, detected in 1997, lasted for about 7 minutes and gradually decreased in frequency over its duration. It was detected across the entire equatorial Pacific hydrophone array, indicating enormous acoustic power. NOAA has attributed it to ice-related activity, possibly a large iceberg scraping along the seafloor. The train, also detected in 1997, is characterized by a steady low-frequency sound that was recorded for an extended period from an apparent source in the Antarctic. The whistle, a brief tonal signal, was detected in 1997 as well, and remains one of the more enigmatic recordings, because its narrow frequency band and short duration make it difficult to attribute to any known natural process. And then there is Julia. What distinguishes Julia from the other unidentified sounds is a combination of factors that, taken together, create a profile that does not sit comfortably within any single explanatory category. First, its duration of approximately 15 seconds is neither very short, which would suggest an impulsive source like an explosion or a crack, nor very long, which would suggest a sustained process like a volcanic vent or a persistent ice grinding event. It falls in an intermediate range that is consistent with several possible sources but uniquely characteristic of none. Second, its frequency structure shows a complexity that sets it apart from simpler ice-related signals. Iceberg grounding events typically produce broad-spectrum noise with some tonal components. Julia's spectrogram, by contrast, shows a more structured pattern, a rise and fall in frequency that suggests a process some degree of coherence. This does not mean the sound was produced by a biological organism, but it does mean the source was not entirely random. Third, the estimated source location in the equatorial Pacific raises questions about the iceberg hypothesis. While not ruling it out, the location makes it less straightforward. An iceberg grounding event in the Antarctic or near an ice shelf would be unremarkable acoustically. An iceberg grounding event in the equatorial Pacific, thousands of kilometers from the nearest ice source, requires a more complex chain of events, and it gets worse. The Julia Sound was detected only once. In the decades since 1999, despite continuous monitoring by NOAA and other organizations, no identical or clearly similar signal has been recorded. This is problematic, because if Julia was produced by an iceberg grounding, one would expect similar events to occur with some regularity, given the continuous calving and drifting of Antarctic icebergs. The absence of a repeat event does not disprove the iceberg hypothesis, because it is possible that the specific combination of iceberg size, grounding location, and acoustic propagation conditions was unique. But it does reduce the confidence with which the hypothesis can be held. For the researchers who studied the Julia Sound in the years following its detection, these factors created a persistent sense of incompleteness. The iceberg hypothesis was the best available explanation, but it was not a satisfying one. It fit some of the data, it did not fit all of it, and in a field where precision matters, where the goal is to account for every feature of a signal with a physical mechanism that can be tested and verified, this kind of partial explanation is unsatisfying. There is a broader issue at stake here, and it concerns the nature of scientific explanation in domains where data is scarce and conditions are extreme. In most areas of science, when a phenomenon is observed that does not match existing models, the response is to gather more data. Run the experiment again, make more observations, refine the instruments, increase the sample size. In deep ocean acoustics, this response is constrained by the environment. Gathering more data from the deep ocean is extraordinarily expensive and logistically challenging. Deploying new hydrophones requires specialized ships and equipment. Maintaining them in the deep ocean requires regular servicing that is itself a major undertaking. The result is that the data set grows slowly, and unexplained sounds can persist in the archive for years or decades without resolution. This is not a criticism of the scientists involved. It is a statement about the difficulty of the enterprise. Studying the deep ocean is hard. Studying the deep ocean sounds is harder still because the sounds are transient. The propagation environment is complex, and the source is often thousands of meters below the surface, in a location that cannot be easily visited or inspected. When a sound like Julia appears in the record, the researchers do their best to explain it with the tools and knowledge available. If the best explanation is a partial one, that is not a failure of the science. It is an honest acknowledgement of the limits of current knowledge. But this acknowledgement has implications. If we accept that the Julia Sound is not fully explained, if we accept that the iceberg hypothesis is plausible but not confirmed, then we must also accept that the deep ocean is capable of producing sounds for which we do not currently have explanations. This is not a radical claim. It is, in fact, an obvious one, given the scale of the ocean and the limitations of our monitoring. But it is a claim that sits uncomfortably with the assumption that we understand our own planet. It suggests that beneath the familiar surface of the Earth, beneath the water that covers most of its area, there are processes occurring that our instruments can detect, but our knowledge cannot fully account for. The Julia Sound forces a confrontation with this reality. It is not dramatic enough to demand attention. It is not loud enough to shake the world. It is not strange enough to prove the existence of unknown creatures or phenomena. It is, instead, precisely ambiguous enough to be uncomfortable. It sits in the gap between the known and the unknown, offering just enough information to provoke questions and not enough to answer them. And there is another layer to this discomfort. The Julia sound, like all the unexplained NOAA recordings, was detected using technology that was originally designed for a specific military purpose: tracking submarines. The Cold War is over, but the technology it created has given civilian scientists their first real window into the deep ocean's acoustic world. What they found when they looked through that window was not what anyone expected. The ocean was not quiet. It was not simple. It was not producing sounds that could all be neatly categorized. Instead, it was producing a rich, complex, and sometimes inexplicable tapestry of sound that hinted at an environment far more active and far more varied than previous models had suggested. The transition from military to civilian use of these hydrophone networks was not just a bureaucratic shift. It was a conceptual revolution. For the first time, the deep ocean's voice was being heard by people who were not listening for submarines. They were listening for the ocean itself, and the ocean had things to say that no one was prepared for. Consider the state of deep ocean science in the early 1990s. The Mariana Trench had been visited once by the bathyscaphe Trieste in 1960, carrying Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh to the bottom of the Challenger Deep. That dive lasted approximately 20 minutes at the bottom before the viewport cracked and the crew had to ascend. In the 3 decades between that dive and NOAA's establishment of its Pacific hydrophone program, no human being returned to the deepest point on Earth. The deep ocean, for all practical purposes, was studied from the surface or from orbit using remote sensing technologies that could tell us about the shape of the seafloor, but almost nothing about the processes occurring within the water column. The hydrophone data changed that. Suddenly, scientists could hear the deep ocean in real time. They could track whale migrations by their calls. They could detect undersea volcanic eruptions as they happened. They could monitor the breakup of Antarctic ice shelves. And they could hear Julia. They could hear the bloop. They could hear the upsweep. They could hear sounds that made them pause and reach for explanations that were not readily available. The significance of this cannot be overstated. Before the 1990s, the deep ocean's acoustic environment was essentially unknown to civilian science. The military had been listening for decades, but their data was classified and their focus was narrow: find the submarines. The broader question of what the ocean sounded like, what natural processes were producing what sounds, where and when and why, that question had not been seriously asked because the tools to answer it had not been available. When those tools became available, the answers they provided were partial, complex, and sometimes baffling. The Julia sound is one of those partial answers. It tells us that something happened in the equatorial Pacific on the 5th of March, 1999, something that produced a 15-second acoustic signal with a complex frequency structure and no clear match in the existing database. Beyond that, the sound tells us very little. It does not reveal its source. It does not explain its mechanism. It does not repeat itself for further study. It simply exists in the archive, a recorded moment of the deep ocean's voice, waiting for someone to find the right question to ask of it. The deeper problem, the one that Julia exposes but does not create, is that the deep ocean is speaking a language we are only beginning to learn. We have the instruments to hear it. We have the technology to record it. We have the mathematical tools to analyze the frequency content, the propagation paths, the arrival times, and the spectral characteristics of the sounds we capture. What we lack is a comprehensive understanding of the sources. We know what whales sound like. We know what earthquakes sound like. We know what icebergs sound like when they calve and crack and grind against the seafloor. But our catalogue of known sources is incomplete. There are geological processes in the deep ocean that have never been observed directly. There are biological organisms in the deep ocean that have never been identified or recorded. There are physical and chemical processes occurring at extreme depths and pressures that we have never had the opportunity to study in situ. Any one of these unknown processes could be producing sounds that our hydrophones detect, but our knowledge cannot classify. The Julia sound could be one such detection. It could be the acoustic signature of a process we have not yet described, a geological event we have not yet witnessed, or a physical phenomenon we have not yet modelled. Or it could be an unusual example of a known process, an iceberg grounding event with atypical characteristics, a volcanic eruption with an unusual acoustic signature, a seismic event that propagated through the water in an unexpected way. The honest answer is that we do not know. And the uncomfortable truth is that, given the current state of deep ocean science, we may not know for a very long time. But here is what makes this truly terrifying. The terrifying part is not the sound itself. It is what the sound represents about the state of human knowledge regarding the single largest environment on our own planet. When NOAA published the spectrogram of the Julia sound and made the audio recording available for public analysis, the response from the scientific community was cautious and measured. Ocean acousticians reviewed the data. Seismologists examined the signal for signatures of tectonic origin. Glaciologists assessed the plausibility of the iceberg hypothesis. Marine biologists considered whether any known organism could produce such a sound. Each group brought its expertise to bear on the problem, and each group reached roughly the same conclusion. The sound was probably natural in origin, most likely related to ice dynamics, but could not be definitively attributed to any specific source. This consensus of uncertainty is telling. It means that among the various scientific disciplines that study the ocean, none could claim ownership of the Julia sound with confidence. The seismologists saw elements consistent with a seismic source, but also elements that were inconsistent. The glaciologists saw similarities to ice-related sounds, but also differences. The biologists noted that while no known organism could produce the Julia signal, the deep ocean contains vast numbers of unidentified species, and the acoustic capabilities of most deep-sea organisms are completely unknown. The sound fell into the gaps between disciplines, too complex for any single field to claim, and too ambiguous for any single explanation to satisfy. This interdisciplinary ambiguity is characteristic of deep ocean mysteries. The ocean does not respect the boundaries we draw between scientific fields. It is a geological system, and a biological system, and a chemical system, and a physical system all at once, and the sounds it produces can be the result of interactions between these systems that no single discipline is equipped to analyze alone. A sound produced by an iceberg grinding against a volcanic seamount, for example, would have both glaciological and geological characteristics. A sound produced by a large marine organism interacting with a hydrothermal vent would have both biological and geochemical features. The deep ocean is a place where the categories we use to organize knowledge break down, and the Julia sound is an artifact of that breakdown. There is also the matter of the unknown biology of the deep ocean. Marine biologists estimate that the deep ocean, defined as everything below 1,000 meters, contains vast numbers of species that have not yet been identified, described, or studied. The exact number is difficult to estimate, but conservative assessments suggest that fewer than 1/3 of deep-sea species have been formally described. Some estimates place the number of undiscovered species in the hundreds of thousands, or even millions. These are not hypothetical creatures. They are real organisms living in the real ocean right now, carrying out their biological functions in total darkness at crushing pressures, and we have no idea what most of them look like, let alone what sounds they make. This matters for the Julia sound, because one of the persistent questions about the unexplained NOAA recordings is whether any of them could have a biological origin. The standard response to this question is that no known marine organism can produce the volume and frequency characteristics of the recorded sounds. This is true. Blue whales, the largest animals known, produce sounds at frequencies and volumes that do not match the unexplained recordings. No identified species of fish, cephalopod, or crustacean comes close. But the key word in this assessment is known. Our knowledge of deep-sea biology is incomplete. Our knowledge of deep-sea bioacoustics, the study of what sounds deep-sea organisms make, is even more incomplete. Many deep-sea organisms have never been recorded alive. Many have never been observed in their natural habitat. Their acoustic capabilities, if any, are entirely unknown. It would be scientifically irresponsible to claim that an undiscovered deep-sea organism produced the Julia sound, because there is no positive evidence for such a claim. But it would be equally irresponsible to rule out biological origins entirely, given the vast number of unidentified species in the deep ocean and our near-total ignorance of their acoustic behavior. The honest scientific position is one of open uncertainty. The Julia sound could be geological, it could be glaciological, it could conceivably be biological. It could be the result of some process we have not yet imagined. What it cannot be, at this stage of our knowledge, is definitively explained. This open uncertainty is not comfortable. Human beings prefer answers. We prefer explanations that close the loop, that resolve the tension between question and answer. The Julia sound does not provide this resolution. It provides, instead, a permanent question mark, a reminder that the deep ocean is vast enough and strange enough to produce phenomena that resist our best efforts at classification. And the Julia sound is not alone in this. It belongs to a family of unexplained recordings that share certain characteristics. They are all of significant acoustic power. They all have frequency profiles that do not precisely match known sources. They all originate from the deep ocean, often from locations that are remote and inaccessible, and they have all proven resistant to definitive explanation despite years or decades of analysis. This pattern suggests that the issue is not with any individual sound, but with the state of deep ocean science itself. We are detecting more than we can explain because we know less about the deep ocean than we know about almost any other environment on the planet. The Julia sound is not an anomaly in the strict sense. It is a predictable consequence of the fact that we have only recently gained the ability to listen to the deep ocean, and our understanding of what we are hearing has not yet caught up with our ability to record it. Consider a parallel from the history of astronomy. When the first radio telescopes were built in the 1930s and 1940s, astronomers began detecting radio signals from space that did not correspond to any known astronomical object. These signals were initially mysterious. Some were attributed to interference. Others remained unexplained for years. Over time, as radio astronomy matured, the sources were gradually identified. Pulsars, quasars, the cosmic microwave background. The initial period of mystery was not a failure of astronomy. It was a natural phase in the development of a new observational capability. The instruments were ahead of the understanding. The same dynamic is at play in deep ocean acoustics. The hydrophones are ahead of the understanding. They are detecting sounds that the current body of knowledge cannot fully explain, not because those sounds are necessarily exotic or otherworldly, but because the body of knowledge is incomplete. The Julia sound, the bloop, the upsweep, these are the deep ocean's equivalent of the early radio signals from space. They are the first data points of a new science, and they will be explained in time, as the science matures, as new data is collected, and as our understanding of deep ocean processes deepens. But in the meantime, they sit in the archive, named but not understood, and they remind us of something that is easy to forget, that the planet we live on is not fully known, not even close. That beneath the water that covers 70% of its surface, there is a world that operates by rules we are still discovering, in conditions we can barely endure, producing sounds that reach our instruments as whispers from an abyss that has never been fully explored. The Julia sound is one of those whispers. It arrived on the 5th of March 1999, played its 15 seconds across the spectrograms of NOAA's Pacific hydrophones, and then fell silent. It has not been heard again. Its source has not been found. Its mechanism has not been confirmed. It exists as a question without an answer, a fragment of the deep ocean's voice, preserved in a digital archive, waiting for the day when our knowledge is sufficient to decode it. That day has not yet come, and every year that passes without a definitive explanation, the Julia sound grows a little more haunting. Not because the sound itself changes, it does not. It remains exactly as it was recorded, but because our awareness of how much we do not know about the deep ocean continues to grow. Each new expedition to the deep sea reveals new species, new processes, new geological features that were not on any map. Each new deployment of deep ocean instruments captures new data that refines our understanding, and almost always reveals new mysteries. The catalogue of the unknown is not shrinking, it is expanding, because every new observation opens doors to more questions than it answers. Something is wrong with our assumptions about how well we know this planet. We have mapped the surface, we have measured the atmosphere, we have charted the stars, but the deep ocean, the single largest habitat on Earth, remains in many fundamental respects a stranger to us. The Julia Sound is a small but persistent reminder of this estrangement. It is a sound from a world we share but do not know, recorded by instruments that were never designed to hear it, analysed by scientists who lack the data to explain it, and archived in a database that grows larger every year with sounds that have no confirmed origin. The deep ocean is not silent. It has never been silent. It is a world of constant acoustic activity, driven by forces that range from the familiar to the unknown, producing sounds that range from the easily explained to the stubbornly mysterious. Julia is one of the mysterious ones. It occupies a place in the record that is neither dramatic nor mundane, neither clearly explained nor clearly inexplicable. It is, in many ways, the perfect representative of our current relationship with the deep ocean, detected, recorded, named, studied, and still not understood. To appreciate how unusual the Julia signal is within the broader context of ocean acoustics, it helps to understand what a typical day sounds like in the deep Pacific. The hydrophone arrays operated by NOAA record continuously, generating spectrograms that scroll across analyst screens like an endless ribbon of color and pattern. Most of what appears on these spectrograms is identifiable. The low, rhythmic pulses of a blue whale's call produce a distinctive horizontal stripe at around 15 to 20 Hz. Fin whale calls appear as short, downward sweeping marks repeated at regular intervals. Earthquakes produce broad smears of energy across many frequencies, fading over time. Shipping noise from distant container vessels creates a persistent low-frequency haze, a kind of acoustic fog that never fully clears. Against this background, an anomalous signal stands out the way a single unfamiliar word would stand out in a conversation conducted in a language the listener knows well. The surrounding sounds are recognizable. The anomaly is not. Julia appeared against this backdrop as a coherent, structured signal that did not belong to any of the familiar categories. Its frequency rose from roughly 0.5 Hz to approximately 5 Hz, then descended again, tracing a shape on the spectrogram that one researcher described as resembling a hill or a mound. The amplitude was sufficient to saturate sensors at moderate range, meaning the original source was radiating considerable acoustic power. The question of how much acoustic power is significant in this context. Sound intensity in the ocean is measured in decibels relative to a reference pressure of 1 micropascal. Typical ocean ambient noise levels in the deep ocean range from about 90 to 110 decibels at low frequencies. A blue whale's call can reach approximately 188 decibels. An undersea earthquake can produce transient peaks well above 200 decibels. The exact source level of the Julia sound is difficult to determine because the source location is not precisely known and the propagation losses along the acoustic path depend on environmental conditions that were not measured at the time. However, the fact that the signal was detected on multiple hydrophones, separated by distances of thousands of kilometers, indicates that its source level was substantial, likely in the range of 180 to 200 decibels or more. This matters because it constrains the possible sources. A sound at this level is not easily produced by small-scale processes. It requires either a large-scale physical event, such as the breakup of a massive ice structure, or a concentrated release of energy, such as a volcanic explosion or a large-scale tectonic movement. Biological sources at this level would require an organism of extraordinary size and acoustic capability, far beyond anything currently known. This is one of the reasons the iceberg hypothesis remains the preferred explanation. Icebergs are large enough, and their interactions with the seafloor can be violent enough to produce sounds at this level. But size and power alone do not explain the signal's frequency structure. A large iceberg scraping against the seafloor would be expected to produce a broadband noise, a chaotic mix of frequencies, resulting from the random grinding and fracturing of ice and rock. The Julia signal, while not narrowband in the strict sense, shows more structure than a purely random process would produce. Its frequency contour, the way it rises and falls over 15 seconds, suggests that the source process had some degree of coherence, some organizing principle that shaped the acoustic output over time. One possible explanation for this coherence is resonance. When a large ice mass grinds against a seafloor feature, the interaction can excite resonant modes in either the ice or the seafloor structure, producing tonal components that ride on top of the broadband noise. If the ice mass or the seafloor feature had a geometry that favored a particular frequency, the resulting sound might show the kind of structured frequency contour seen in the Julia spectrogram. This is a plausible mechanism, and it is consistent with the iceberg hypothesis. But it is also speculative, because the specific ice mass and seafloor feature involved have never been identified. Another possibility involves underwater landslides. The equatorial Pacific contains numerous seamounts and ridges, and the slopes of these features are sometimes unstable. A large underwater landslide, triggered by a seismic event or by the gradual accumulation of sediment, could produce a sound with both broadband and tonal characteristics as the sliding mass interacted with the water and the seafloor. Underwater landslides are known to generate acoustic signals that can propagate over long distances through the SOFAR channel, and their acoustic signatures can be complex, reflecting the chaotic yet partially coherent nature of the slide process. A third possibility, rarely discussed in the formal literature, but sometimes raised in informal conversations among ocean acousticians, is that the Julia sound represents a type of event that has not yet been categorized. This is not as exotic a suggestion as it might seem. The deep ocean contains geological features and processes that have only recently been discovered or are still poorly understood. Hydrothermal systems, cold seeps, gas hydrate deposits, deep ocean current interactions, and subsea floor fluid dynamics are all active areas of research, and each of these systems is capable of producing acoustic emissions that have not been fully characterized. The deep ocean is not a static environment. It is a dynamic, geologically active system in which energy is constantly being released and absorbed, in which materials are constantly being transported and transformed, and in which physical and chemical processes are constantly occurring at scales ranging from the microscopic to the continental. The idea that this system might produce an occasional acoustic event that falls outside our current catalogue is not surprising. It would in fact be surprising if it did not. And this is the core problem that the Julia sound embodies. It is not a sound that screams for attention. It is not a sound that demands a radical rethinking of ocean science. It is, instead, a sound that quietly reveals the limits of our knowledge, the boundaries of our catalogues, and the gaps in our understanding of the most fundamental processes occurring on our own planet. It is a 15-second reminder that the deep ocean is not a solved problem. It is a frontier, and we are standing at its edge, listening to sounds that drift up from the darkness below, catching fragments of a vast acoustic reality that we are only beginning to map. The Julia sound arrived once, spoke its 15 seconds, and departed. It left behind a spectrogram, a digital recording, and a question. That question has not been answered, and until it is, the sound sits in the archive, a small but persistent gap in the wall of human knowledge, through which the cold, dark, pressurized reality of the deep ocean continues to leak. There is a concept in ocean science that captures this situation precisely. It is called the problem of underdetermination. When a signal is detected in the deep ocean, the number of possible sources is, in principle, very large. The signal has traveled through a complex medium. It has been refracted, reflected, scattered, and attenuated along the way. By the time it arrives at the hydrophone, it carries the imprint not just of its source, but of every feature it encountered along its propagation path. Disentangling the source characteristics from the propagation effects is an inverse problem, and inverse problems in complex media are notoriously difficult to solve, especially when the medium itself is not fully characterized. For the Julia sound, this underdetermination is acute. The signal arrived at the hydrophones after traveling through hundreds or thousands of kilometers of deep ocean water. Along the way, it passed through temperature gradients, salinity layers, current boundaries, and possibly encountered seamounts, ridges, and other bathymetric features that could have altered its character. The signal that the analysts saw on their spectrograms was not a pure recording of the source event. It was a convolution of the source signal and the acoustic environment through which it passed. This means that the true acoustic signature of whatever produced the Julia sound may be quite different from what was recorded. The rise and fall in frequency, the amplitude variations, the harmonic content, all of these features could have been introduced or modified by propagation effects. The analysts know this. They account for it as best they can in their analysis, but they cannot fully compensate for propagation effects in an environment where the conditions along the propagation path are not known in detail. The result is inherent ambiguity. The spectrogram tells a story, but it is a story filtered through thousands of kilometers of ocean, and some of the details have been lost or altered in the telling. This is the fundamental challenge of deep ocean acoustics, and it is the challenge that the Julia sound forces us to confront. We are listening to the deep ocean through a medium that transforms what we hear. We are interpreting the transformed signal with knowledge that is incomplete, and we are drawing conclusions that are, by necessity, provisional. The Julia sound is not a mystery because someone is hiding the answer. It is a mystery because the answer exists somewhere in the vast, dark, pressurized, poorly mapped, and acoustically complex environment of the deep Pacific, and we do not yet have the tools or the knowledge to extract it. The Julia sound does not exist in isolation. It is one thread in a larger tapestry of deep ocean mysteries, each of which illuminates a different facet of humanity's profound ignorance about the world beneath the waves. To understand Julia, we need to understand the broader landscape of deep ocean phenomena that defy easy explanation, phenomena that have been explored, investigated, and theorized about, and that continue to resist definitive resolution. Each of these phenomena represents a different angle on the same fundamental problem. The deep ocean is doing things we do not fully understand, in places we can barely reach, through mechanisms we are still learning to describe. The first of these phenomena involves life at hydrothermal vents, and the way it overturned one of the most basic assumptions in biology. In 1977, a team of geologists aboard the research submersible Alvin descended to a depth of approximately 2,500 meters near the Galapagos Rift in the eastern Pacific Ocean. They were investigating hydrothermal vents, underwater geysers where superheated water, sometimes reaching temperatures above 350 degrees Celsius, erupts from the seafloor along mid-ocean ridges. The scientists expected to find hot water and mineral deposits. What they found was life. Enormous clusters of giant tube worms, some reaching nearly 2 meters in length, surrounded the vents. Mussels and clams of unusual size clung to the rocks. Ghostly white crabs crawled across the vent structures. An entire ecosystem was thriving in complete darkness, at crushing pressure, in water laced with hydrogen sulfide and heavy metals that would be toxic to most surface organisms. This discovery was revolutionary. Prior to 1977, the fundamental assumption of biology was that all complex life on Earth depended, directly or indirectly, on photosynthesis. Sunlight drove plant growth, which fed herbivores, which fed predators, in an energy chain that began with light and ended with decomposition. The hydrothermal vent communities shattered this assumption. They were sustained not by sunlight but by chemosynthesis, a process in which specialized bacteria convert chemical energy from hydrogen sulfide and other volcanic compounds into organic matter. The bacteria served as the base of the food chain, supporting the tube worms, mussels, and other organisms through symbiotic relationships. The implications were staggering. If life could thrive in total darkness, at extreme pressures, in water saturated with toxic chemicals, then the range of environments capable of supporting life was far wider than anyone had assumed. And if the range of habitable environments was wider than assumed, then the range of possible biological activity in the deep ocean was also wider, including acoustic activity. But here is the problem. While the discovery of hydrothermal vent communities expanded our understanding of where life can exist, it also revealed how little we know about the deep ocean's biology in general. The vent ecosystems were discovered by accident during a geological survey that had no biological objectives. They had existed for an unknown period of time, supporting communities of organisms that were entirely new to science, in a habitat that no biologist had predicted could support complex life. And if such a major biological discovery could occur by accident in the late 1970s, what else remains undiscovered in the 95% of the deep ocean that has never been surveyed? This question has direct relevance to the Julia Sound and the other unexplained NOAA recordings. If the deep ocean can harbour entire ecosystems that went undetected until a submersible happened to stumble upon them, then it can certainly harbour individual organisms or biological processes that produce sounds we have never recorded. The absence of a known biological source for the Julia Sound does not mean no biological source exists. It means we have not found one yet, in an environment that has barely been searched. The second phenomenon concerns brine pools, one of the most alien features of the deep ocean. In several locations on the ocean floor, particularly in the Gulf of Mexico and the Mediterranean Sea, there exist pools of water so dense with dissolved salt that they form a distinct layer on the seafloor, separated from the surrounding water by a visible boundary that looks, from the vantage of a submersible, like the shoreline of an underwater lake. These are brine pools, and they are among the strangest environments on Earth. The water in a brine pool can be 3 to 5 times saltier than the surrounding seawater, and this extreme salinity creates conditions that are lethal to most marine organisms. Fish and crustaceans that blunder into a brine pool are often killed or stunned by the toxic chemistry. Yet brine pools are not lifeless. At their edges, where the extreme brine meets the normal seawater, specialized communities of bacteria and other microorganisms thrive, feeding on the chemical energy released by the interaction between the two water masses. Mussels and tube worms cluster around the margins. The pools emit methane and hydrogen sulfide, creating localized chemistry that supports ecosystems entirely decoupled from the surface. What makes brine pools relevant to the Julia Sound is not their biology but their physics. Brine pools can interact with the surrounding water and the underlying geology in complex ways. Methane seeps associated with brine pools can produce bubbling and rumbling sounds as gas escapes from the sediment. The interaction between the dense brine and the surrounding water can create convective currents and turbulence. The underlying geological structures, salt domes and mud volcanoes, can shift and settle, producing seismic and acoustic events. None of these processes have been acoustically characterized in a way that would allow them to be identified on a distant hydrophone spectrogram. They are potential sound sources hiding in plain sight. The numbers are striking. In the Gulf of Mexico alone, more than 1,000 methane seep sites have been identified, and the true number is likely much higher. Globally, the number of active seeps, brine pools, and associated geological features on the deep ocean floor is unknown, but certainly in the tens of thousands. Each of these features is a potential source of acoustic energy, and almost none of them have been studied acoustically. The deep ocean's acoustic catalogue is missing entire categories of sources because those sources have never been recorded at close range. The third phenomenon involves the disappearance of ships and aircraft in the region, popularly known as the Bermuda Triangle, and what it reveals about the power of the ocean to confound our understanding. The so-called Bermuda Triangle, a loosely defined area of the western Atlantic Ocean between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, has been the subject of popular fascination for decades. Numerous ships and aircraft have been lost in this region, under circumstances that in some cases remain unexplained. The popular narrative attributes these disappearances to supernatural or exotic causes. The scientific perspective is more measured. The Bermuda Triangle is one of the busiest shipping and aviation corridors in the world, and the rate of losses in this area, when adjusted for traffic volume, is not significantly higher than in any other comparable region. However, the scientific investigation of these losses has revealed something relevant to the broader theme of ocean mysteries. The Western Atlantic, particularly in the area around the Bahamas and the Caribbean, contains extensive methane hydrate deposits on the seafloor. Methane hydrates are ice-like compounds in which methane molecules are trapped within a lattice of water molecules, stable at the high pressures and low temperatures of the deep ocean floor. Under certain conditions, these hydrate deposits can destabilize, releasing large volumes of methane gas that rise through the water column. Laboratory experiments and mathematical models have shown that a sufficiently large release of methane from the seafloor could, in theory, reduce the density of the water at the surface to a degree that would cause a ship to lose buoyancy and sink. The bubbles would also reduce the density of the air-water interface in ways that could affect low-flying aircraft. While this mechanism has not been proven to have caused any specific disappearance, the underlying science is sound, and it illustrates an important point. The deep ocean floor contains reservoirs of chemical energy that can be released suddenly and with dramatic effects on the surface. The acoustic implications of large-scale methane release events are significant. A massive degassing event on the seafloor would produce a substantial acoustic signal, a combination of bubbling, rumbling, and possibly explosive sounds as the gas expanded from the high-pressure environment of the deep ocean to the lower-pressure water column above. Such a signal might propagate through the SOFAR channel and be detected by distant hydrophones, appearing on a spectrogram as an anomalous sound with complex frequency characteristics. Has this ever happened? Has a methane hydrate destabilization event ever been recorded by NOAA's hydrophone arrays? The answer is that we do not know. No such event has been definitively identified in the acoustic record, but the possibility exists, and it represents yet another category of deep ocean acoustic source that is theoretically predicted but not yet confirmed observationally. The fourth phenomenon takes us to the waters around Yonaguni Island, at the southernmost tip of the Japanese archipelago, where an underwater structure was discovered in 1986 that has been debated by geologists and archaeologists ever since. The Yonaguni Monument, as it is sometimes called, is a large rock formation lying on the seafloor at a depth of approximately 5 to 40 meters off the coast of Yonaguni Island. The structure features what appear to be flat terraces, sharp edges, right angles, and step-like formations that, to the untrained eye, resemble a man-made structure, a submerged pyramid or temple complex. Some researchers have argued that the formation is evidence of an ancient civilization, a city lost to rising sea levels at some point in the distant past. Others, including most mainstream geologists, argue that the formation is entirely natural, the product of tectonic uplift and the natural fracturing patterns of the underlying sandstone and mudstone. The Yonaguni Monument is relevant to our discussion not because it is directly connected to the Julia Sound, but because it illustrates a broader truth about the ocean. We do not know what is down there. The Yonaguni Formation was not discovered by a scientific expedition. It was found by a recreational diver. It has been debated for decades, and the debate continues because the underwater environment is difficult to study with the thoroughness that would be needed to settle the question definitively. The formation sits in relatively shallow water, easily accessible by divers and submersibles, and yet its nature remains contested. If we cannot definitively determine whether a rock formation in shallow, accessible water is natural or artificial, how can we claim to understand the processes occurring at depths of 3, 4, 5, or 10,000 meters, in total darkness, at pressures that destroy our instruments, in locations that have never been visited? The Yonaguni debate is a reminder that the ocean is fundamentally resistant to our attempts to understand it, even in its shallowest, most accessible regions. The fifth phenomenon concerns the organisms of the deep sea that appear to defy the physical limits of biology. In the Hadal zone, at depths exceeding 6,000 meters, organisms survive under conditions that, according to the biological models developed on the surface, should be incompatible with life. The pressure at 10,000 meters exceeds 1,000 times atmospheric pressure. At this pressure, the biochemistry of cells is altered in fundamental ways. Proteins unfold, cell membranes lose their fluidity, enzymatic reactions are disrupted, and yet life persists. The organisms that thrive at these depths have evolved molecular adaptations that allow their proteins to remain functional under extreme pressure. They produce specialized molecules called piezolites that stabilize their cellular structures against the distorting effects of pressure. Their cell membranes contain unusual lipid compositions that maintain flexibility where surface membranes would become rigid. Their metabolisms operate at rates that are, by surface standards, extraordinarily slow, but that are precisely calibrated to the energy availability and environmental conditions of the Hadal zone. Some of these organisms are far larger than expected. Supergiant amphipods, crustaceans that grow to lengths exceeding 30 centimeters, have been found in the deepest trenches, far exceeding the size of their shallow water relatives. This phenomenon, known as deep-sea gigantism, is not fully understood. One hypothesis suggests that the absence of predators and the low metabolic rates at extreme depths allow organisms to grow larger than they could in shallower, more competitive environments. Another suggests that the cold temperatures and high pressures favor larger body sizes for reasons related to cellular efficiency. Whatever the cause, the existence of these organisms raises acoustic questions. Large organisms moving through water produce sound. Large crustaceans, feeding, mating, and interacting with their environment, produce sounds that, in shallower water, are well documented. Snapping shrimp, for example, produce some of the loudest biological sounds in the ocean, snapping their claws with such force that the resulting cavitation bubble produces a sound exceeding 200 decibels. If deep-sea organisms produce sounds at comparable relative levels, those sounds would propagate through the deep ocean's acoustic environment with minimal attenuation. But no one has ever deployed acoustic monitoring equipment directly within the Hadal zone for an extended period. The instruments capable of operating at these pressures are rare, expensive, and difficult to deploy. Our knowledge of the Hadal zone's acoustic environment is based almost entirely on recordings made at shallower depths in the Sofar channel, which captures sounds propagating horizontally from distant sources. Sounds generated within the Hadal zone might propagate vertically or scatter in ways that make them difficult to detect from Sofar channel hydrophones. This is a significant gap in our acoustic monitoring of the ocean. The deepest parts of the ocean, the places where the strangest organisms live and the most extreme conditions prevail, are the places we know least about acoustically. The Julia sound may or may not have any connection to Hadal zone biology, but the fact that we cannot rule this out because we have almost no acoustic data from the Hadal zone itself is a telling indicator of the state of our knowledge. Each of these 5 phenomena, hydrothermal vent ecosystems, brine pools, methane hydrate destabilization, the Yonaguni formation, and Hadal zone biology, represents a different facet of the same underlying reality. The deep ocean is full of processes and features that we have only recently discovered, that we do not fully understand, and that could plausibly be producing acoustic events that appear on our spectrograms as unexplained sounds. The Julia sound sits at the intersection of these unknowns. It is an acoustic event whose source could lie in any one of these domains, or in a domain we have not yet identified. The standard approach in ocean acoustics is to explain unknown sounds by matching them to the closest known analog. For Julia, the closest known analog is an iceberg grounding event. But as we have seen, the match is imperfect. The frequency structure is more complex than typical iceberg signals. The apparent source location is unusual for iceberg activity, and the sound has never been repeated, despite continuous monitoring. If we set aside the iceberg hypothesis and consider the full range of possible sources, the list is long and mostly uncharacterized. Volcanic activity, tectonic shifting, methane release, hydrothermal processes, large-scale sediment movement, resonance effects in underwater geological structures, biological activity by unknown organisms, and interactions between any combination of these processes could, in theory, produce a sound with the characteristics of Julia. The problem is not a lack of possible explanations. It is a surplus. There are too many possibilities and too little data to discriminate among them. The math is striking when considered in full. The deep ocean covers approximately 360 million square kilometers and has an average depth of 3.7 kilometers. The total volume of the deep ocean below 1,000 meters is approximately 1.1 billion cubic kilometers. NOAA's Pacific Hydrophone Array, the system that detected Julia, monitors a corridor of perhaps a few million square kilometers of ocean surface, which sounds like a lot until you realize it represents less than 1% of the total ocean area. Vertically, the SOFAR channel captures sounds propagating at a specific depth range, which means events occurring at very different depths might propagate differently and potentially be missed entirely by the array. We are listening to less than 1% of the ocean's area, at a specific depth, through a medium we do not fully understand, with a catalogue of known sources that is incomplete. Under these conditions, detecting unexplained sounds is not anomalous. It is expected. The Julia sound is not a glitch in the system. It is a natural consequence of the system's limitations. And the limitations are not technical in the narrow sense. They are fundamental. They stem from the sheer size, depth, and complexity of the environment we are trying to monitor. None of this means that the Julia sound is necessarily exotic or otherworldly. The most likely explanation remains prosaic, an ice-related event with unusual characteristics, a geological process that produced an atypical signal, or some combination of known factors that happened to align in a way that created a sound outside the existing catalogue. But the inability to confirm any of these explanations despite decades of effort is itself significant. It tells us that the deep ocean is not yet a place where we can confidently explain what we hear. It tells us that our confidence in understanding our own planet is misplaced, at least where the ocean is concerned. And it tells us that there are sounds coming from the deep, recorded on our instruments, preserved in our archives, that represent questions to which we do not yet have answers. The Julia sound is one of those questions, and like all the best questions in science, it points not to a single missing fact, but to an entire landscape of unknowns, an unexplored frontier that lies not in some distant corner of the galaxy, but beneath the water that laps against our shores, and this is where the answer becomes deeply unsettling. There is a sixth angle worth exploring, one that ties the acoustic mystery of Julia to a broader crisis in how we study the deep ocean, and it concerns the technology itself. The hydrophones that detected the Julia sound in 1999 were, by the standards of ocean acoustics, remarkably capable instruments. They could detect sound across a wide range of frequencies, from the infrasonic rumbles of distant earthquakes to the higher-pitched clicks of marine mammals. They were positioned in the SOFA channel, the optimal depth for long-range detection, and they recorded continuously, capturing every sound that passed through their location. But for all their capability, they had limitations that are important to understand. The first limitation is spatial. A hydrophone records sound at a single point. It captures the acoustic energy arriving at its location from all directions. It does not, by itself, provide information about the direction from which a sound came, let alone the precise location of the source. To estimate a source location, analysts need data from multiple hydrophones and must use the differences in arrival time at each sensor to triangulate. This process, called localization, works well for loud, impulsive events where the onset of the signal can be precisely identified. It works less well for sustained, gradually varying sounds where the onset is gradual and the arrival time at each sensor is ambiguous. The Julia sound, with its approximately 15-second duration and its gradually changing frequency, presents a challenging localization problem. The arrival time differences at different hydrophones can be estimated, but the uncertainties are significant. The resulting source location estimate covers a large area of ocean, not a precise point on the map. This means that, even if we wanted to investigate the source location directly, to send a submersible or a remotely operated vehicle to the spot where the sound was generated, we would not know exactly where to look. The search area would be enormous, covering thousands of square kilometers of deep ocean. The second limitation is temporal. The hydrophones record continuously, but the data processing was not, in the late 1990s, performed in real time. The recordings were stored and analyzed later, sometimes weeks or months after the sounds were captured. This meant that by the time an anomalous sound like Julia was identified, any transient phenomenon that might have accompanied it A plume of sediment, a thermal anomaly, a visible disturbance of the water column had long since dissipated. There was no opportunity to deploy instruments to the source location quickly enough to observe the source event in progress. Modern deep ocean monitoring systems are somewhat better in this regard, with near real-time data transmission becoming more common. But in 1999, the delay between recording and analysis was significant, and it meant that the Julia Sound was discovered as an archaeological artifact rather than a live event. It was studied after the fact, with no possibility of direct observation. The third limitation involves frequency coverage. While the hydrophones were sensitive across a wide frequency range, the SOFAR channel is most effective at propagating low-frequency sounds. Higher frequency sounds, above roughly 100 Hz, are attenuated more rapidly by the water and may not propagate effectively through the channel over long distances. This means that the hydrophone array was biased toward detecting low-frequency events and might miss or underrepresent events with significant higher frequency content. If the Julia Sound had a higher frequency component that was attenuated during propagation, the recorded signal would represent only a partial picture of the original event. These technological limitations compound the scientific limitations already discussed. We are listening to the deep ocean with instruments that can detect sounds at one location but not precisely locate them, that record continuously but are not analyzed in real time, and that are sensitive to a range of frequencies but biased toward the lower end. We are interpreting the resulting data with a catalogue of known sources that is incomplete, and with models of acoustic propagation that are approximate. At every stage, there are sources of uncertainty, and these uncertainties accumulate. The result is a situation in which confidence in any specific explanation for the Julia Sound, or for any of the other unexplained NOAA recordings, must be modest. The iceberg hypothesis for Julia is the best available explanation, but best available is not the same as confirmed. It is the explanation that fits the most data with the fewest assumptions, but it does not fit all the data, and it requires assumptions about the presence, size, and location of an iceberg that have not been independently verified. This is not a criticism of the scientists who proposed the hypothesis. It is a description of the structural constraints under which deep ocean science operates. The deep ocean is hard to study. The instruments are limited. The data is sparse. The environment is vast and complex. Under these conditions, provisional explanations are the best that can be achieved, and the Julia Sound, like many deep ocean phenomena, exists in a state of permanent provisionality. But provisionality is not the same as insignificance. The Julia Sound matters precisely because it resists easy resolution. It matters because it forces us to confront the limitations of our technology and our knowledge. It matters because it sits in the archive as tangible evidence that the deep ocean is producing events that we can detect but not explain. And it matters because, for all our technological sophistication, for all our satellites and computers and advanced acoustics, we are still fundamentally unable to answer a simple question: what made that sound? There is something humbling about this. Human civilization has reached a point where we can measure the gravitational waves produced by colliding black holes billions of light years away. We can detect the faint glow of the oldest light in the observable universe. We can map the surface of distant planets and analyze the composition of their atmospheres. But we cannot explain a 15-second sound recorded in our own ocean on our own planet less than 30 years ago. This is not because the sound is impossibly exotic. It is because the ocean is impossibly large. The gap between our ability to detect acoustic events in the deep ocean and our ability to explain them is a direct consequence of the ocean's scale. The instruments can hear the sound, but the ocean is too vast, too deep, and too poorly mapped for us to trace the sound back to its source with certainty. The technology has outrun the knowledge. The ears are open, but the eyes are closed. Consider the effort that would be required to definitively explain the Julia Sound. First, we would need to precisely localize the source, which would require either a denser array of hydrophones or a different detection methodology. Second, we would need to survey the source area, which would require sending a deep submergence vehicle to a remote area of the equatorial Pacific, a logistically complex and expensive undertaking. Third, we would need to identify the physical feature or process responsible for the sound, which might require extensive geological, chemical, and biological sampling of the seafloor and water column. Fourth, we would need to either observe a repeat event or simulate the proposed source process to confirm that it could produce a signal matching the Julia recording. Each of these steps is individually achievable with current technology, but taken together, they represent a major scientific expedition requiring millions of dollars in funding, months of ship time, and the coordination of multiple scientific disciplines. For a single 15-second sound recorded more than a quarter of a century ago, the allocation of such resources is difficult to justify, given the many competing priorities of ocean science. And this is perhaps the most poignant aspect of the Julia Sound's persistence as a mystery. It is not unsolved because it is unsolvable. It is unsolved because the deep ocean has never been a priority. Compared to the funding allocated to space exploration, to particle physics, to medical research, the study of the deep ocean receives a fraction of the resources and attention. The deep ocean covers most of our planet. It contains most of our planet's water, most of its habitable volume, and quite possibly most of its biodiversity. And yet, per square kilometre, it receives less scientific attention than the surface of Mars. This is the context in which the Julia Sound persists as a mystery. It is unsolved, not because science lacks the capability to solve it, but because the investment needed to solve it has never been made. The deep ocean, for all its size and significance, has been treated as a secondary concern, a place of academic interest but not of pressing importance. The result is a situation in which sounds are recorded, catalogued, named, and then left in the archive because the resources needed to investigate them further are not available. The Julia Sound has been waiting in that archive for more than 25 years. It has been studied, discussed, presented at conferences, and written about in technical papers. It has been listened to by thousands of people through online recordings. Its sped-up, eerie whine becoming a minor internet phenomenon among those fascinated by ocean mysteries. But it has not been solved. No one has visited the estimated source location. No one has identified the specific physical process that produced it. No one has found a second example. It sits in the data, patient and unresolved, a small question mark in a vast ocean of unknowns. And this patience is, in its own way, more unsettling than any dramatic revelation could be. A mystery that can be solved is satisfying. A mystery that defies solution is frustrating. But a mystery that persists, not because it is unsolvable, but because we have chosen not to invest the resources needed to solve it, that is something else entirely. That is a commentary on our priorities. It is a reflection of the choices we have made about what we study and what we ignore, about which frontiers we explore and which we leave in darkness. The Julia Sound waits, the deep ocean waits, and the distance between what we hear and what we understand grows narrower each year. But it does not close. Not yet. There is one further dimension to the exploration of these deep ocean mysteries that deserves careful attention, and it involves the way sound itself can be transformed by the ocean into something almost unrecognizable from its original form. Acoustic researchers have long understood that the ocean is not a passive medium for sound transmission. It is an active one. It bends sound. It stretches it. It splits a single signal into multiple arrivals. It adds reverberation. It filters out certain frequencies and amplifies others. A sound that begins as a clean, recognizable pulse at its source can arrive at a hydrophone hundreds of kilometers away as a smeared, distorted version of its original self, carrying the acoustic fingerprint not just of the source event, but of every thermal layer, current boundary, and bathymetric feature it encountered along the way. This phenomenon has practical consequences for the interpretation of the Julia Sound and all other unexplained recordings. When an analyst looks at a spectrogram and sees a complex frequency structure, that complexity might reflect the complexity of the source, or it might reflect the complexity of the propagation path, or most likely some combination of both. Distinguishing between these possibilities requires detailed knowledge of the ocean conditions along the path. Knowledge that, in the case of the Julia Sound, was not available at the time of the recording and cannot be reconstructed after the fact. One well-studied example of this propagation distortion involves what is called multipath arrival. A single sound event at a distant source can produce multiple arrivals at a hydrophone because the sound travels along different paths through the water. One path might follow the direct route through the SOFAR channel. Another might reflect off the surface. A third might reflect off the seafloor. Each path has a different length and passes through different conditions. So the sound arrives at the hydrophone at slightly different times and with slightly different characteristics. When these multiple arrivals overlap, they produce a composite signal that can be considerably more complex than the original sound. For a signal like Julia, which shows a frequency pattern that rises and then falls, multipath effects could either enhance or obscure the true nature of the source. If the original sound was a simple pulse or a monotone burst, multipath arrivals could create the appearance of frequency variation as different paths delivered slightly shifted versions of the signal at different times. Conversely, if the original sound truly had a complex frequency structure, multipath effects might smear it further, making it even harder to identify the source. This ambiguity is not resolvable with the data currently available. It would require either a much denser hydrophone array, capable of separating different arrival paths, or a precise model of the ocean conditions along the propagation path, neither of which existed at the time of the Julia recording. The result is that the spectrogram of the Julia sound, the primary piece of evidence available to researchers, is itself an uncertain document, a filtered and distorted representation of whatever event actually occurred. This is a common condition in deep ocean acoustics, and it is one that the public rarely appreciates. When NOAA releases a spectrogram of an unexplained ocean sound, it is sometimes interpreted as a direct picture of the source event, much as a photograph is a direct picture of whatever was in front of the camera. But a spectrogram is not a photograph. It is a processed representation of a signal that has been transformed by thousands of kilometers of ocean. The relationship between the spectrogram and the source event is more like the relationship between a shadow on a cave wall and the object that cast it. The shape is related to the original, but the details have been lost, the proportions have been altered, and the true nature of the object remains hidden. Plato's allegory of the cave is not an unreasonable analogy for the state of deep ocean acoustics. We are sitting in a cavern of our own ignorance, watching the shadows of sounds that have been cast upon our spectrograms by events occurring in a world we cannot directly see. We interpret the shadows as best we can. We compare them to known shapes. We construct hypotheses about what might have cast them. But the cavern walls distort the shadows, and the objects themselves remain in the unreachable darkness beyond. This brings us back to the fundamental question that the Julia sound poses, not what made the sound, but whether we are equipped to answer that question at all, given the current state of our technology, our knowledge, and our investment in deep ocean science. The answer, for now, is that we are not fully equipped. We have made remarkable progress. The transition from classified military hydrophones to civilian research networks was a major step forward. The development of autonomous underwater vehicles, deep-sea observatories, and satellite-linked monitoring buoys has expanded our reach. The advent of machine learning algorithms for acoustic classification has improved our ability to sort through vast volumes of data. But these advances, significant as they are, have not yet closed the gap between detection and explanation. The Julia sound was detected in 1999. It is now more than a quarter of a century later. The sound has not been explained. New sounds continue to be detected. Some are explained quickly. Others join Julia in the archive of the unresolved. The archive grows. The deep ocean continues to speak, and we continue to listen, catching fragments of a conversation that we are only beginning to understand. The challenge is not just technical, it is also philosophical. How do we respond to the knowledge that our own planet is producing sounds we cannot explain? How do we incorporate this uncertainty into our understanding of the world? How do we hold the tension between the confidence that our science inspires and the humility that the deep ocean demands? These are not questions that the Julia sound can answer. They are questions that the Julia sound provokes. And in provoking them, in forcing us to sit with the discomfort of not knowing. The sound fulfills a function that goes beyond its acoustic properties. It becomes a meditation on the limits of human knowledge, a reminder that the frontier is not always distant, and that the unknown is not always exotic. Sometimes the unknown is directly beneath us, hidden under the same water that we swim in, fish in, and sail upon, speaking in a language we have not yet learned. The Julia sound speaks that language. We have recorded its words, we have given them a name, but we have not yet decoded the message, and there is no guarantee that we ever will. There is one more exploration worth considering before we leave this section, and it concerns the growing field of passive acoustic monitoring, as applied to ocean conservation and its unexpected discoveries. In recent years, marine scientists have deployed networks of hydrophones, not for the purpose of detecting anomalous sounds, but for the purpose of monitoring marine life. By recording the acoustic environment of coral reefs, seamounts, and coastal waters, researchers can assess the health of marine ecosystems without physically disturbing them. A healthy reef produces a characteristic acoustic signature: the snapping of shrimp, the grunting and clicking of fish, the scraping of sea urchins. A degraded reef is acoustically quieter, its soundtrack diminished by the loss of biodiversity, its once vibrant chorus reduced to a sparse and mournful whisper that tells its own story of decline. This work has produced an unexpected byproduct. As passive acoustic monitoring has expanded, the volume of recorded ocean sound has increased dramatically. Thousands of hours of audio from hundreds of locations around the world are being collected every year, far more than any team of analysts can review in detail. Machine learning algorithms are being developed to sort through this deluge of data, flag sounds that do not match known categories for human review. And those algorithms are finding things. They are detecting sounds that were not predicted, sounds that do not fit the existing models, sounds that, like Julia, provoke questions that cannot be immediately answered. Some of these sounds turn out to be produced by known organisms engaging in previously undocumented behaviors. Others remain unidentified. The growing acoustic record of the ocean is revealing that the soundscape is richer, more varied, and more complex than anyone anticipated. This is consistent with a pattern that runs throughout the history of ocean science. Every time we develop a new method for observing the ocean, we find more than we expected. Every time we expand our coverage, we discover new phenomena. The ocean consistently exceeds our predictions, not in dramatic headline-making ways, but in the quiet accumulation of data points that do not fit our models, sounds that do not match our catalogues, organisms that do not belong in our taxonomies, and features that do not appear on our maps. The Julia sound is one of those data points. It is not unique in being unexplained. It is, in a sense, representative. It represents the entire category of ocean phenomena that we have detected but not understood. A category that is growing rather than shrinking as our monitoring capabilities expand. Every new hydrophone we deploy, every new algorithm we train, every new year of continuous recording adds to the inventory of sounds that demand explanation, and the rate at which we can explain them has not kept pace with the rate at which we are detecting them. This is not a failure. It is a natural stage in the development of any science that observes a complex natural system. The early phase of discovery always produces more questions than answers. The deep ocean is in its early phase. We are gathering data faster than we can interpret it, detecting phenomena faster than we can explain them, and asking questions faster than we can answer them. The Julia sound is one of those questions. It was asked on the 5th of March, 1999, by something in the equatorial Pacific that we have never identified. The ocean posed the question. We recorded it. And now, more than 2 decades later, we are still searching for the answer. The search continues. The archive grows. The deep ocean speaks. And somewhere in the cold, dark water beneath the Pacific, whatever made the Julia sound may still be there, silent now, but capable at any moment of speaking again. The deeper truth about the Julia sound is not about the sound itself. It is about us. It is about the species that calls this planet home, that has mapped its continents and measured its atmosphere, and sent probes to the farthest reaches of the solar system, and that cannot explain a 15-second noise coming from its own ocean. The Julia sound, in its small, persistent way, exposes a truth that is both obvious and deeply uncomfortable. We do not know our own planet. Consider the numbers. The ocean covers approximately 71% of the Earth's surface. It constitutes approximately 99% of the planet's habitable volume, defined as the three-dimensional space in which life can exist. And as of the most recent estimates, less than 25% of the ocean floor has been mapped to a resolution that would reveal features like underwater mountains, trenches, and ridges. The rest, approximately 75% or more of the seafloor, has been mapped only at the coarse resolution provided by satellite gravity measurements, a method that can detect very large features but misses anything smaller than approximately 1.5 kilometers. Let that sink in. 3/4 of the ocean floor has never been mapped in detail. We have higher resolution maps of the surface of Mars, of the Moon, of Venus, than we have of the bottom of our own ocean, the planet beneath the waves. The geological terrain upon which the single largest habitat on Earth rests is less well known than the surfaces of worlds that are millions or hundreds of millions of kilometers away. This is not science fiction. This is the current state of ocean science, confirmed by the most authoritative surveys available. The Nippon Foundation GBO Seabed 2030 project, an international initiative to map the entire ocean floor by the year 2030, reported that as of 2023, approximately 24.9% of the ocean floor had been mapped to modern survey standards. The remaining 75% is terra incognita, or more accurately, mare incognita, an unknown sea whose topography, geology, and acoustic character remain hidden beneath miles of water and centuries of neglect. The implications of this for the Julia Sound are direct and significant. The sound originated somewhere in the equatorial Pacific. The seafloor in this region contains features that have been identified only at coarse resolution: seamounts, ridges, fracture zones, abyssal plains. The fine-scale topography, the actual shapes and structures of the seafloor at the estimated source location, is unknown. If the Julia Sound was produced by an interaction between a large ice mass and a seafloor feature, we cannot identify that feature because we do not know what features exist at that location. If it was produced by a geological process, we cannot describe that process because we do not know the geology of the area in sufficient detail. This is the fundamental constraint that governs all deep ocean mystery. We are trying to explain sounds that come from a place we have not mapped, produced by processes occurring on a seafloor we have not surveyed, in conditions we have not measured, involving features we have not discovered. The wonder is not that some sounds remain unexplained. The wonder is that we have managed to explain any of them at all. Now consider the biological dimension. The ocean contains the vast majority of the planet's biodiversity. Current estimates suggest that the ocean is home to somewhere between 500,000 and more than 10 million species, the wide range reflecting the profound uncertainty in our knowledge. Of these, a significant fraction have not been formally described. In the deep ocean specifically, the proportion of undiscovered species is believed to be especially high. Some marine biologists estimate that for every deep-sea species that has been identified and studied, there may be 2 or 3 or more that remain unknown. Let that sink in. We share this planet with millions of species that we have not found. Most of them live in the ocean. Many of them live in the deep ocean, in the same darkness, the same pressure, the same cold that produce the Julia Sound. We do not know what they look like. We do not know what they eat. We do not know how they reproduce, and we do not know what sounds they make. The acoustic environment of the deep ocean is shaped by the organisms that inhabit it. Even in the relatively well-studied shallow ocean, marine bioacoustics has revealed a stunning diversity of sounds produced by organisms ranging from microscopic larvae to the largest whales. Fish produce sounds by vibrating their swim bladders. Crustaceans snap, click, and rasp. Whales and dolphins produce calls that range from the subsonic to the ultrasonic. Each organism contributes to the overall soundscape, and together they create an acoustic environment of extraordinary richness. In the deep ocean, this richness is almost entirely undocumented. A few deep-sea species have had their sounds recorded, usually during brief encounters with submersibles or remotely operated vehicles. but the vast majority of deep-sea organisms have never been studied acoustically. Their contributions to the deep ocean soundscape are unknown. If even 1% of unidentified deep-sea species produce sounds that are detectable by hydrophones, the acoustic environment of the deep ocean contains a substantial population of uncharacterized sound sources. This biological uncertainty compounds the geological uncertainty already discussed. The deep ocean is a place where both the physical environment and the biological community are inadequately known, where the sources of sound are numerous and diverse, and where the tools we use to listen are limited in their spatial coverage and their ability to identify what they hear. Under these conditions, the persistence of unexplained sounds like Julia is not merely expected, it is inevitable. There is a deeper philosophical point here, and it concerns the nature of knowledge itself. Human beings are accustomed to thinking of the Earth as a known quantity. We have seen it from space. We have photographed every continent. We have mapped its weather patterns and tracked its climate. We have named its mountains and its rivers and its deserts. The Earth, in our collective imagination, is a familiar place, a home that we understand. The deep ocean shatters this illusion. It reveals that the familiar Earth, the one we see and photograph and map, is only a fraction of the actual Earth. The majority of the planet, by area, by volume, by biodiversity, lies hidden beneath the ocean surface, in a realm that we have barely begun to explore. The Julia sound is an ambassador from that hidden majority, a signal from the largest and least known environment on our planet, carrying information that we can record but not interpret. This is not a comfortable truth. It challenges the narrative of human mastery over nature. It challenges the assumption that our technology has given us a comprehensive understanding of the world we inhabit. It challenges the implicit belief that, in the 21st century, there are few genuine mysteries left on Earth. The deep ocean is not an incremental gap in our knowledge. It is a chasm vast and deep and dark, and the Julia sound echoes from its depths. The comparison with space exploration is instructive and, for many, surprising. 12 human beings have walked on the moon, a celestial body approximately 384,000 kilometers from Earth. As of the most recent counts, only a handful of people have reached the bottom of the Challenger Deep, a location that is approximately 11 kilometers below the surface of the Earth's own ocean. We have sent rovers to Mars, probes to Jupiter and Saturn, and a spacecraft to the edge of the solar system. We have not sent a single permanent manned observatory to the deep ocean floor. The reasons for this disparity are complex. Space exploration captures the public imagination in a way that ocean exploration, for the most part, does not. Space has cultural cachet, it has heroes. It has the narrative of frontier exploration that resonates with something deep in the human psyche. The deep ocean, by contrast, is dark, it is wet, it is cold and pressurized and inhospitable. It does not lend itself to the same heroic narratives, and it does not receive the same funding. The consequences of this disparity are real. Our knowledge of the deep ocean is decades behind where it could be if it received the same attention and investment as space. The Julia sound is a symptom of this gap. It exists as a mystery because the infrastructure needed to solve it, the dense hydrophone arrays, the rapid response submersibles, the detailed seafloor maps, does not exist, not because the technology is impossible, but because the money has not been spent. There is an irony here that is worth noting. We search the cosmos for signs of life on other worlds. We listen for radio signals from distant civilizations. We build telescopes to peer into the atmospheres of exoplanets, looking for the chemical signatures of biology. And while we do all of this, we have not yet identified the organisms living in the deepest parts of our own ocean. Organisms that are not hypothetical, not theoretical, but real, existing, producing sounds that reach our instruments as unidentified anomalies in a spectrogram. The Julia sound may or may not have a biological origin, but the fact that we cannot rule this out, the fact that our knowledge of deep ocean biology is so incomplete that an unknown organism remains a viable, if unlikely, candidate for a sound detected by a major government monitoring network, tells us something about the state of our priorities. We are looking outward when the most profound unknowns may be directly beneath us, hidden under the very water we see from our beaches, producing sounds that travel through the darkness and arrive at our instruments as questions without answers. This is the deeper truth that the Julia sound reveals. It is not a truth about the ocean. It is a truth about humanity. It is the truth that we have not yet committed to knowing our own planet, that we have treated the deep ocean, the single largest environment on Earth, as an afterthought, that we have built systems capable of detecting sounds from the abyss, but not systems capable of explaining them, and that the gap between detection and explanation, between hearing and understanding, remains a measure of how much we have left to learn. The Julia sound does not demand a dramatic conclusion. It does not require the discovery of an unknown creature or a new geological process. It requires something more basic and more difficult: a sustained commitment to studying the deep ocean with the same rigor, the same resources, and the same ambition that we bring to the study of space. Until that commitment is made, sounds like Julia will continue to accumulate in the archive, named but not explained, heard but not understood, and the deep ocean will continue to speak in a language that we have not yet made the effort to learn. This is not a comfortable position for a species that considers itself the most intelligent on the planet. It is not a comfortable position for a civilization that prides itself on its scientific achievements. But it is the position we are in. The Julia sound makes this clear. It is a 15-second reminder that we live on a planet we do not fully know, surrounded by water we have not fully explored, floating above darkness we have not fully penetrated. And somewhere in that darkness, right now, as these words are spoken, the deep ocean continues to produce sounds that no human ear has ever heard and no human instrument has ever recorded. The Julia sound was one of the few that reached us. How many others have come and gone, undetected, unrecorded, unknown? That question has no answer, and the absence of an answer is, perhaps, the most unsettling thing of all. There is a concept in the philosophy of science that is useful here, and it is called the problem of unknown unknowns. The phrase was popularized in a different context, but its application to the deep ocean is precise. Known knowns are the things we understand about the ocean: whale calls, earthquake signatures, shipping noise, the physics of sound propagation. Known unknowns are the things we know we do not understand: the source of the Julia sound, the identity of undiscovered species, the exact topography of the unmapped seafloor. These are gaps in our knowledge that we can identify and, with sufficient effort, potentially fill. Unknown unknowns are different. They are the things we do not even know we do not know. They are the phenomena, the processes, the organisms, and the events that exist in the deep ocean, but that we have no way of predicting, no framework for anticipating, and no instruments positioned to detect. They are the sounds that the ocean is making, right now, at this very moment, that no hydrophone is recording, because no hydrophone is in the right place at the right depth. They are the geological processes occurring on unmapped seafloor that we cannot describe because we do not know they are happening. They are the biological behaviors of undiscovered species that we cannot study because we do not know those species exist. The Julia sound sits at the boundary between known unknowns and unknown unknowns. We know the sound exists. We know we cannot explain it, but we do not know whether the explanation lies within the range of known processes, an unusual iceberg event or volcanic eruption, or whether it requires the identification of a process or a source that we have not yet imagined. This boundary is where the most interesting science happens, and it is where the most unsettling questions reside. Consider the history of deep ocean discovery. Before 1977, no one predicted the existence of hydrothermal vent ecosystems. They were a true unknown unknown, a phenomenon that existed beyond the boundaries of what scientists had imagined possible. When they were discovered, they did not merely add a new entry to the catalogue of known habitats. They fundamentally altered the conceptual framework within which biologists understood life. They showed that an entire category of life-sustaining processes had been overlooked, that the definition of habitable was too narrow, and that the deep ocean was capable of surprises that no one had anticipated. The Julia sound has not produced a similar paradigm shift. It is, compared to the discovery of vent ecosystems, a modest anomaly. but it hints at the same underlying truth. The deep ocean is capable of producing phenomena that fall outside our existing frameworks. Whether the Julia Sound ultimately turns out to be an unusual example of a known process, or the first detection of something genuinely new, the fact that it has resisted explanation for more than 2 decades tells us that our frameworks are not yet comprehensive enough to cover the full range of what the deep ocean can produce. This has implications that extend beyond ocean science. If the largest environment on our own planet can produce unexplained phenomena, what does this say about our broader confidence in understanding the natural world? The deep ocean is not some distant, inaccessible realm like the interior of a star or the surface of a neutron star. It is right here, beneath the surface of the water that covers most of the planet we live on. We can reach it, given sufficient resources. We can study it, given sufficient investment. But we have not yet done so comprehensively, and the result is that it continues to surprise us. The Julia Sound is one of those surprises. It is not the most dramatic. It is not the loudest. It is not the most mysterious, if mystery is measured by the degree to which a phenomenon defies all proposed explanations. The upsweep, with its persistent seasonal recurrence and its apparent volcanic source, is in some ways more enigmatic. The bloop, with its immense acoustic power and its initial misidentification as a possible biological signal, generated more public attention. Julia is quieter, more modest, more easily overlooked. But that modesty is precisely what makes it significant. The Julia Sound is the kind of mystery that is most representative of the deep ocean's true character. The deep ocean does not typically produce dramatic, headline-grabbing phenomena. It produces subtle, persistent, low-grade anomalies that accumulate over time, each one too small to demand attention on its own, but collectively forming a picture of an environment that is fundamentally incompletely understood. The Julia Sound is one of these anomalies. It is a thread in a tapestry of unknowns that covers the deep ocean like the sediment that covers the abyssal plains, layer upon layer, accumulating slowly, hiding the bedrock of complete understanding beneath a growing deposit of unresolved questions. There is also the matter of what the Julia Sound tells us about the passage of time in the deep ocean. The sound was recorded in 1999. That is more than a quarter century ago. In that time, the world above the ocean has changed dramatically. Technologies have advanced, populations have shifted, climate patterns have altered. But in the deep ocean, at the depth where the Julia Sound was produced, the passage of more than 25 years is barely perceptible. The temperature has not changed. The pressure has not changed. The darkness has not changed. The fundamental conditions of the deep ocean are so stable, so slow to shift, that a quarter century is an instant in its timescale. This temporal scale matters because it suggests that whatever produced the Julia Sound is operating in a world where time moves differently. If the source was a geological process, it may be a process that unfolds over centuries or millennia, producing occasional acoustic events at intervals that are too long for our monitoring period to capture more than one. If the source was a biological process, it may involve an organism with a lifespan and activity cycle that spans decades, producing sounds at intervals that are rare by human standards but normal by the standards of the deep ocean ecosystem. We are accustomed to thinking of the world in human timescales, years, decades, lifetimes. The deep ocean operates on geological timescales, thousands, millions, hundreds of millions of years. Our monitoring of the deep ocean's acoustic environment spans roughly 3 decades. 3 decades, set against the timescales of the deep ocean, is not even a heartbeat. It is a fraction of the time over which the processes we are trying to understand operate. This temporal mismatch introduces another source of uncertainty into the interpretation of the Julia Sound. We have one data point, a single 15-second event recorded in 1999. If the process that produced the sound operates on a timescale of centuries, then our 3 decades of monitoring are far too short to capture a second example. The absence of a repeat event is not evidence that the process is rare or unique. It may simply be evidence that we have not been listening long enough. The deep ocean is patient. It has been operating for longer than human civilization has existed. It will continue to operate long after every hydrophone we have deployed has corroded and failed. The Julia Sound was a brief intersection between the deep ocean's timescale and our own, a moment when an event occurring in geological time crossed the threshold of our monitoring capability and was captured. That moment lasted 15 seconds. Then the deep ocean returned to its own pace, and we returned to ours, carrying the recording, but not the explanation. This temporal perspective adds another dimension to the deeper truth that the Julia Sound embodies. We are not just a species that does not fully know its own planet. We are a species whose monitoring efforts span an infinitesimal fraction of the timescales on which the deep ocean operates. We are taking snapshots of a process that unfolds over eons. The Julia Sound is one of those snapshots. It is frozen in time, preserved in a digital archive. But the process that produced it, whatever it was, continues to operate in the darkness below, unmeasured and unobserved, on a timescale that our instruments are too transient to capture. We are listening to the deep ocean through a keyhole. The Julia Sound is one of the few things that passed by the opening while we had our ear pressed to it. How much more is happening on the other side, beyond the narrow field of our instruments, beyond the brief duration of our attention, beyond the shallow reach of our understanding? The honest answer is, we do not know, and honesty about what we do not know is, in the end, the most valuable thing the Julia Sound has to offer. The relationship between what we know and what we do not know about the ocean has shifted several times in the history of human civilization, and each shift has been prompted by a technological advance that revealed how incomplete the previous understanding was. The invention of the deep-sea dredge in the 19th century revealed that life existed at depths where scientists had confidently declared the ocean to be sterile. The deployment of echo sounders in the early 20th century revealed the existence of mid-ocean ridges and deep-sea trenches that were not on any chart. The development of the bathyscaphe in the 1950s allowed humans to descend to the ocean floor for the first time, revealing landscapes of alien beauty and strangeness. And the release of Cold War hydrophone data in the 1990s revealed an acoustic environment far richer and more complex than anyone had anticipated. Each of these advances followed the same pattern. A new technology was introduced. It revealed phenomena that were not predicted by the existing knowledge base. The existing knowledge base was revised to accommodate the new findings. And then, invariably, the revised knowledge base was discovered to be incomplete as well, when the next technological advance revealed yet another layer of previously hidden reality. We are currently in one of these transitional periods. The tools available for deep ocean study are more capable than at any point in history. Autonomous underwater vehicles can dive to any depth and remain submerged for months. Advanced multi-beam sonar can map the seafloor with centimeter-level resolution. Deep ocean observatories, cabled to shore, provide continuous real-time data from fixed locations on the seafloor. Satellite-linked drifting instruments provide data from across the ocean basins. Machine learning algorithms can process volumes of acoustic data that would take human analysts years to review. And yet, with all of these tools, we still cannot explain the Julia Sound. We still cannot map most of the ocean floor. We still cannot identify most of the species in the deep ocean. We still cannot predict when and where unexplained sounds will appear on our spectrograms. The tools have improved, the knowledge has grown, but the gap between what we know and what the ocean contains has not closed. It has, in many respects, widened because each new tool reveals more unknowns than it resolves. This is the paradox of deep ocean science. The more we learn, the more we realize we do not know. The Julia Sound is an emblem of this paradox. It was detected because we had the technology to hear it. It remains unexplained because we lack the knowledge to interpret it. And with every new advance in ocean monitoring technology, new sounds are being detected, new species are being glimpsed, and new questions are being raised that our current understanding cannot answer. The ocean is not withholding its secrets deliberately. It is simply too large, too deep, and too complex to yield them easily. The Julia Sound is not a riddle that the ocean posed to humanity. It is a natural event that occurred in a natural environment, and our inability to explain it is not a failure of the ocean, but a limitation of our own reach. The ocean has always been making sounds. We are the newcomers to the conversation. And there is something profound in acknowledging this. There is something clarifying about recognizing that we are not the masters of our planet, but the students of it, still early in our education, still learning the alphabet of a language that the ocean has been speaking since before our species existed. The Julia sound is one letter of that alphabet. We have recognized its shape, we have given it a name, but we do not yet know what it means. The deep ocean waits with the patience of stone and water and time. It has been speaking for longer than we have been listening. It will continue to speak after our instruments have failed and our archives have been forgotten. The Julia sound is a tiny fragment of that eternal conversation, caught in the net of our technology for a brief moment before the net was pulled away and the conversation continued without us. And somewhere beneath the Pacific, right now, the ocean is making sounds that no one will ever hear. Sounds that rise and fall and echo through the SOFAR channel and dissipate into the thermal layers and the abyssal currents, carrying information about processes and events that are happening in the deep, in the dark, in the silence that is not silent, in the world that we have not yet found the courage or the commitment to truly explore. The Julia sound asked a question in 1999. We have not yet answered it. The question still hangs in the water, patient and unresolved, and the ocean continues to speak around it, adding new questions with every passing year, building a catalogue of unknowns that grows faster than our ability to resolve them. This is the deeper truth. Not that the ocean is mysterious, but that we have barely begun to listen. And this is not a metaphor. It is a literal description of our condition. The instruments exist but are few. The recordings exist but are sparse. The knowledge exists but is partial. And the ocean, the real ocean, the three-dimensional, miles-deep, planet-spanning body of water that holds most of the life and most of the mystery on Earth, continues to operate according to its own logic, its own rhythms, its own timescales, indifferent to whether we are listening or not, indifferent to whether we understand or not, indifferent to the small named sounds that we have extracted from its vastness and placed in our archives like insects pinned in a collection, each one labelled but none fully known. Julia. Bloop, upsweep, slow down, train, whistle. 6 names for 6 sounds from an ocean that produces millions. 6 questions from an environment that can contain billions. 6 moments of acoustic intersection between our technology and the deep ocean's ceaseless voice. And behind each name, behind each spectrogram, behind each cautious hypothesis, the same deeper truth: we have barely begun. What does it mean for a species to inhabit a world it does not understand? This is not a theoretical question. It is our present condition. We live on a planet whose largest feature, the deep ocean, remains in most respects unknown to us. We breathe air regulated by oceanic processes we are still mapping. We eat food harvested from waters whose ecosystems we have barely catalogued, and we produce waste that sinks into depths where we cannot monitor its effects. The Julia sound forces us to sit with this condition rather than look away from it. It is a concrete, recorded, undeniable piece of evidence that the deep ocean contains acoustic phenomena we cannot explain. It is not a rumour. It is not folklore. It is data captured by government instruments, archived by federal scientists, and available for anyone to listen to. And it remains, after more than a quarter of a century, without a definitive explanation. The implications of this go beyond the Julia sound itself. If the deep ocean can produce sounds we cannot explain, what else can it produce? What geological events? What biological processes? What chemical reactions are occurring right now in the darkness below that we have no instruments to detect and no frameworks to anticipate? The Julia sound is the tip of an iceberg, to use a metaphor that may be more literal than intended given the leading hypothesis for its origin. It is the visible portion of a vast body of unknown activity that extends into the depths of the ocean and the depths of our ignorance. For humanity, this has practical implications. The deep ocean plays a critical role in regulating the planet's climate. It absorbs heat from the atmosphere. It absorbs carbon dioxide from the air. It circulates nutrients and minerals through systems that span entire ocean basins. Changes in deep ocean conditions, Shifts in temperature, in circulation patterns, in chemical composition can have consequences that propagate upward to the surface and affect weather, agriculture, and human health. Yet our monitoring of the deep ocean is so sparse that changes could be occurring right now, at this moment, that we would not detect until their effects became visible at the surface, by which time the opportunity to respond might have passed. The deep ocean is also a repository of resources that are increasingly being eyed by commercial interests. Deep-sea mining, the extraction of mineral-rich nodules and crusts from the ocean floor, is a rapidly developing industry that promises access to metals and rare earth elements that are essential for modern technology. But the environmental impacts of deep-sea mining are poorly understood because the ecosystems that would be affected are poorly studied. We are contemplating the industrial exploitation of an environment that we have not yet finished exploring. We are preparing to extract resources from a habitat that may contain species we have not yet discovered, species that may fill ecological roles we have not yet identified, species that may produce sounds we have not yet heard. There is a philosophical dimension to this as well. The Julia sound and the broader category of unexplained ocean phenomena it represents challenges the human tendency to believe that understanding is the natural state of affairs, that the default condition of the world is to be known, and that unknowns are merely temporary gaps waiting to be filled. The deep ocean suggests otherwise. It suggests that the default condition of the world is to be unknown, and that our knowledge is the exception rather than the rule. The ocean did not become mysterious because we started listening to it. It was always mysterious. We simply did not realize it. This shift in perspective, from the assumption of knowledge to the acknowledgement of ignorance, is not easy. It requires a kind of intellectual humility that does not come naturally to a species that has split the atom, decoded the genome, and landed on the moon. But the deep ocean demands it. The Julia Sound demands it. Every unexplained spectrogram in the NOAA archive demands it. They say, collectively, you do not know as much as you think you know. The world beneath the waves is more complex, more varied, and more active than your models predict. There are moments in the history of science where the confrontation with the unknown has been transformative. The discovery of X-rays revealed an invisible form of radiation that transformed medicine and physics. The discovery of cosmic background radiation revealed the remnant energy of the earliest moments of the observable universe. The discovery of dark matter and dark energy revealed that the majority of the universe's mass and energy consists of substances that we cannot directly detect and do not understand. Each of these discoveries was, in its moment, a humbling realization that the visible, measurable, familiar world was only a fraction of the full reality. The deep ocean is our planet's dark matter. It is the majority of our world that we cannot directly experience and do not fully understand. It is all around us, beneath us, defining the shape and character of the planet we inhabit, yet invisible to the vast majority of humanity. The Julia sound is a faint signal from this hidden majority, a whisper from the dark mass of the ocean, carrying information that we can record but not decode. What will we do with this knowledge? What will we do with the understanding that our own planet is largely unknown to us? The optimistic answer is that we will invest in ocean science, that we will deploy the instruments, fund the expeditions, and train the researchers needed to close the gap between what we hear and what we understand. There are signs that this is beginning to happen. The Seabed 2030 project is mapping the ocean floor. New autonomous vehicles are being developed for deep ocean exploration. Acoustic monitoring networks are being expanded. Machine learning tools are being applied to the analysis of ocean sound data. But these efforts are small relative to the scale of the task. The deep ocean is enormous, the unknowns are legion, and the funding, while growing, remains a fraction of what is allocated to other scientific enterprises. The Julia Sound will likely remain unexplained for the foreseeable future, not because it is unsolvable, but because the resources needed to solve it are not being allocated. And so we sit with the sound. We sit with the spectrogram, its wavering contours preserved in a digital archive. We sit with the question it poses, a question that is both simple and profound. What made that sound? And behind that question, a larger one. What else is happening in the deep ocean that we have not yet heard? These are questions that do not have urgent practical consequences. The Julia Sound does not threaten human safety. It does not affect commerce or national security. It is, by most measures, a scientific curiosity, a footnote in the vast literature of ocean acoustics. But curiosities have a way of becoming catalysts. The discovery of hydrothermal vents began as a curiosity and became a revolution in biology. The detection of cosmic background radiation began as an unexplained noise in a radio antenna and became the foundation of modern cosmology. The Julia Sound may never achieve that level of significance, but the category of phenomena it represents, the unexplained sounds of the deep's ocean, has the potential to reshape our understanding of our own planet. If even one of those sounds turns out to be produced by a previously unknown process, geological or biological or chemical, the implications could ripple through multiple scientific disciplines. And even if every unexplained ocean sound is eventually attributed to known processes, the effort of investigating them will have deepened our understanding of those processes and of the environment in which they occur. The journey of explanation is itself valuable, regardless of where it leads. The Julia Sound invites us on that journey. It does not promise a destination. It does not guarantee a satisfying answer. It offers only the question, and the darkness from which the question emerged, and the faint hope that if we listen long enough and carefully enough, the deep ocean will eventually teach us how to understand what it has been saying all along. There is one final reflection worth offering on what the Julia Sound means for our place on this planet. Every civilization in human history has had a frontier, a boundary beyond which the known world ended and the unknown began. For ancient maritime cultures, that frontier was the horizon. For medieval cartographers, it was the blank spaces on the map, labelled with the famous warning, "Here be dragons." For the explorers of the Age of Sail, it was the coastlines of continents that no European had visited. For the scientists of the 20th century, it was the atom, the genome, and the cosmos. In the 21st century, the frontier is below us. It is the deep ocean. It is the miles of black water between the sunlit surface and the abyssal floor. It is the trenches that plunge 7 miles into the crust of the earth. It is the plains that stretch for thousands of kilometers without a single feature visible to human eyes. It is the acoustic landscape of rumbles and groans and whispers and screams that our hydrophones detect and our knowledge cannot always explain. Julia is a sound from this frontier. It is a voice from the edge of the known world, carried to us by the physics of the SOFAR channel and the technology of the Cold War, arriving in our archives as a reminder that the frontier still exists, that the map still has blank spaces, and that the deep ocean, for all our science and technology, remains in many respects as unknown as any territory our ancestors faced. The difference is that our ancestors knew they were facing the unknown. They set out to explore it, to map it, to claim it. We, by contrast, have largely turned away from our frontier. We have looked up instead of down. We have invested in the distant rather than the proximate. We have built our telescopes and our rockets and our space stations, and we have left the deep ocean in its darkness, producing sounds that drift through the water and arrive at the few instruments we have scattered across the seafloor, carrying questions that we have not committed to answering. The Julia Sound does not judge this choice. It does not advocate for a particular allocation of scientific resources. It simply exists, a 15-second fragment of the deep ocean's voice, preserved in a digital archive, waiting. It has been waiting for more than 25 years. It will continue to wait for as long as the archive endures and the question it poses remains unanswered. And in that waiting, there is a kind of dignity. The Julia Sound does not demand attention. It does not compete for headlines. It does not appeal to fear or wonder or ambition. It simply sits in the data, patient and unresolved, a quiet testament to the fact that the planet we live on has depths we have not plumbed, voices we have not recognized, and stories we have not yet heard. The ocean is patient. It has been speaking for longer than we have existed. It will continue to speak after we have gone. And the Julia Sound, whatever its origin, is one of the few words from that ongoing monologue that we managed to catch, to record, and to remember. What we do with that memory is up to us. And yet, there is something hopeful in the existence of the Julia Sound itself. It means that we were listening. It means that, at least in one moment, in one location, with one network of instruments, we were paying attention to what the deep ocean had to say. The sound reached us because someone deployed the hydrophones, someone maintained them, someone analyzed the data, and someone had the curiosity to flag a 15-second anomaly and give it a name. That chain of effort, modest as it is, represents a commitment to understanding the ocean that, while insufficient, is real. The Julia Sound is evidence not only of the ocean's mystery, but of humanity's willingness to confront it. That willingness is worth preserving. It is worth expanding, because the ocean will continue to speak, and the only question is whether we will be there to listen. There is a sound in the archive. It has been there since 1999. It lasts 15 seconds. It has a name, Julia. It came from the equatorial Pacific, from a depth where sunlight has never reached, through water so cold and pressurized that it would destroy any unprotected human body in moments. It traveled through the SOFAR Channel, the deep ocean corridor of sound, crossing hundreds or thousands of kilometers of open water before arriving at the hydrophones that recorded it. It was loud enough to be detected on multiple sensors. It was complex enough to resist easy classification, and it was unique enough to be given a name. Since that day in March of 1999, no identical sound has been recorded. The Julia Sound appeared once, spoke its brief piece, and fell silent. Whatever produced it, whether it was an iceberg scraping against the sea floor, a volcanic event, a geological shift, or something that our current science cannot name, has not produced the same sound again, at least not within the range of our instruments, not within the span of our monitoring. The spectrogram remains, a visual record of 15 seconds of the deep ocean's voice, frozen in time, displayed as a pattern of color and intensity on a frequency time plot. It is a beautiful object in its way. The frequency contour rises and falls with a smooth, almost organic grace, like the crest of a wave or the curve of a hill. There is a reason someone thought it sounded human. There is a reason someone named it Julia. The sound carries something in its shape that resonates with the human ear, something that suggests coherence, intention, meaning, even though there may be none. This is one of the strange consequences of studying the deep ocean's sounds. The human brain is a pattern-seeking organ. It finds faces in clouds and voices in wind. When it encounters a sound from the deep ocean that has a structured, non-random quality, it reaches for the most familiar explanation. This sounds like something alive. This sounds like something speaking. This sounds like something that means something. The scientific response to this impulse is caution. The Julia Sound's frequency structure can be explained by physical processes without invoking biological origins. Ice scraping against rock, resonance effects in geological structures, the complex interaction of sound waves with the ocean environment, all of these can produce signals that, to a human ear, sound coherent and purposeful. The deep ocean does not need to be alive to speak. The physics of sound and the geology of the seafloor can produce vocalizations of startling complexity without any biological involvement. And yet, the caution is warranted, but so is the wonder. Because we do not know all the sources, we do not know all the processes, we do not know all the organisms, and we do not know what the deep ocean is capable of producing at the extreme pressures and temperatures and darknesses that define its character. The scientific caution tells us not to assume biological origins without evidence. The scientific honesty tells us not to rule them out, either in an environment that we have barely explored. The Julia Sound occupies this space between caution and wonder. It is a sound that could be ice, it could be rock, it could be something else entirely. It does not resolve, it does not explain itself. It simply exists in the archive, available to anyone who wishes to listen, carrying its 15 seconds of deep ocean voice into the light of human awareness, and offering nothing in return except the question, "What made you, Julia? What are you?" The ocean does not answer. It has never answered. It simply continues to produce sound, vast quantities of it, through processes that span the gamut from the familiar to the unknown, radiating acoustic energy into the water column from every ridge, every vent, every creature, every current, every bubble of gas, escaping from every pocket of sediment, every crack forming in every slab of cooling rock. The symphony of the deep never pauses. It never rests. It has been playing since the first water filled the first basin, and it will continue to play as long as the ocean endures. We catch fragments of this symphony. We record what passes through the SOFAR channel at the few locations where we have placed our instruments. We analyze what we can. We name what we cannot explain. And we add the names to the archive, where they sit alongside the spectrograms and the audio files, each one a frozen moment of the deep ocean's voice. Julia is one of those names. It is a small name for a small mystery in a vast ocean, but small mysteries accumulate. They build on one another. They form a picture that, when viewed from a sufficient distance, reveals something larger than any individual sound. They reveal the outline of the deep ocean's true nature, a world of constant acoustic activity, largely unmonitored, largely unexplained, largely unknown, operating on timescales and at depths that dwarf our instruments and our understanding. The deep ocean does not care whether we understand it. It does not arrange its physics for our benefit. It does not produce sounds to communicate with us. It simply operates according to the laws of physics and chemistry and biology that govern its existence, generating an acoustic output that is as natural and as unremarkable from the ocean's perspective as the sound of wind through trees is from the perspective of the land. What is remarkable is that we hear it at all. What is remarkable is that for a brief period in the history of our species, we developed the technology to listen to the deep ocean and had the curiosity to pay attention to what we heard. What is remarkable is that we gave the sounds names, Julia and Bloop, and Upsweep and Slowdown and the rest, and that we preserved them in archives and wrote papers about them and wondered, in the quiet moments of our scientific lives, what they might mean. This is what the Julia sound means in the end. It means that we are a species capable of wonder, capable of listening, capable of asking questions that we may never answer, capable of sitting with mystery without reaching for easy resolution, capable of confronting the vastness of the unknown without turning away. The deep ocean is the unknown that is closest to us, the frontier that lies not across some distant expanse, but directly beneath the surface of the water that meets our shores. The Julia sound is a whisper from that frontier, carrying a message that we have not yet decoded, spoken in a language that we have not yet learned, from a world that we have not yet found the will to fully explore. It is a sound without a confirmed source, a name without a face, a question without an answer. It is the deep ocean, speaking to itself as it has always done, and us, the latecomers, pressing our instruments against the water and straining to understand. The ocean has been speaking for longer than our species has existed. It was speaking when the first civilizations rose. It was speaking when the first ships ventured onto its surface. It was speaking when the first hydrophones were lowered into its depths. And it was speaking on the 5th of March, 1999, when something in the equatorial Pacific produced a 15-second acoustic event that we recorded, catalogued, named, and failed to explain. It is speaking now, right now. As these words reach the air, the deep ocean is producing sounds. Whales are calling, ice is cracking, volcanoes are rumbling, currents are shifting, sediment is settling, and somewhere, in the crushing darkness, processes that we have not identified and organisms that we have not discovered are contributing their own voices to the deep ocean's unending chorus. We will hear some of those voices, we will record them, we will give them names, and some of them, like Julia, will resist our explanations. They will sit in the archive, patient and unresolved, reminders of the vast gap between what we hear and what we understand. The weight of all that water presses down, kilometre after kilometre, crushing and cold, upon a world that has never seen light and never needed it, a world that has never stopped making sounds that drift upward through the deep, reaching for the surface, reaching for the instruments, reaching for the ears of a species that lives on the thin, bright skin of a planet it does not yet know. The Julia sound reached us. It completed that journey from the darkness to the light. It arrived at our instruments, was captured by our technology, and entered our awareness. That arrival is, in itself, a small triumph. Not a triumph of explanation, but a triumph of contact. For 15 seconds, the deep ocean and human consciousness touched, and something passed between them. Something we have preserved but not yet understood. And that is enough. Not enough to be satisfied. Not enough to stop listening. But enough to know that the frontier is real, that the unknown is close, and that the deep ocean, the great dark majority of our own planet, still has things to tell us. 15 seconds. One name. An ocean of questions, Julia.